every time the eagles appear, someone asks the question. You know the question. It is the question that has been asked in every forum, every comment section, every movie theatre lobby, every book club discussion of Tolkien since the day The Lord of the Rings was first published. It is, by a comfortable margin, the most frequently asked question in the entire history of Tolkien fandom. Why didn't they just fly the eagles to Mordor? And the question seems reasonable. The eagles are enormous. They can fly. They are clearly powerful. They show up at the Battle of Five Armies. They show up at the Black Gate. They rescue Gandalf from the top of Orthanc. They rescue Frodo and Sam from the slopes of Mount Doom. They are, by any measure, one of the most formidable forces in Middle-earth, and they seem to arrive precisely when they are needed, like a divine taxi service that operates on the most dramatic possible schedule. So why not just fly to Mordor? Why not skip the entire quest, the fellowship, the suffering, the mines of Moria, the marshes, the stairs, the ring, and just put a hobbit on an eagle and fly to Mount Doom and drop the ring in the fire? The question is understandable. And the question is also, I want to argue tonight, based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what the eagles are. Because the eagles are not giant birds. They are not flying horses. They are not a transportation service that Gandalf can call upon whenever the plot requires an aerial extraction. The eagles are something else entirely, something older, something stranger, something far more important and far more terrifying than the movies ever showed you. The great eagles of Middle-earth are, in the deepest and most precise sense that Tolkien's cosmology allows, divine agents. They are messengers of the gods. They are the eyes and the wings and the talons of the King of the Valar, the mightiest of the angelic powers that govern the world. They are not animals that happen to be large. They are spiritual beings that have taken the form of eagles. Beings of the same fundamental nature as Gandalf, as Sauron, as the Balrogs. They are, in the framework of Tolkien's theology, angels. Angels with wingspans the length of a football field. And once you understand what the eagles really are, once you understand their nature, their purpose, their place in the cosmic hierarchy of Middle-earth, the question of why they didn't fly to Mordor stops being a plot hole and starts being a revelation. A revelation about the nature of divine intervention, about the rules that govern the Valar's involvement in the affairs of Middle-earth, and about the specific, deliberate, theologically precise reasons why the most powerful beings in the world are also the most restrained. Stay with me tonight. This is a story about birds that are not birds, about gods that do not interfere, and about the most misunderstood creatures in the history of fantasy literature. Part 1. Man's Eyes and Ears. The eagles were created by Manu. This is the foundational fact, the single most important piece of information about the eagles, the fact that changes everything about how you understand them and their role in the story. Man is the king of the Valar, the leader of the angelic powers, the being who sits at the pinnacle of the cosmic hierarchy of Tolkien's world, second only to Ilúvatar, the creator himself. Man is the lord of the air, the master of the winds, the being whose domain is the sky and everything that moves through it. He is the closest of the Valar to Ilúvatar's thought, the being who understands the Creator's purposes more clearly than any other, whose judgments are the most aligned with the will of the divine. And Man sent the eagles into the world. In Tolkien's earlier writings, he describes the eagles as being made or devised by Man-W, created specifically to serve as his emissaries, his watchers, his agents in the affairs of Middle-earth. In later writings, the conception shifted. Tolkien suggested that the eagles might be Maiar, angelic spirits of the same order as the Astari, who had taken the form of great birds and who served Mandu's purposes in the physical world. The distinction matters, and it is worth being honest about. Tolkien did not settle the question definitively. He revised his conception of the eagles over the decades of his work, and the final authoritative statement on their exact nature was never made. But whether they are creations of Manwë or Maiar in eagle form, the essential point is the same. The eagles are not natural creatures. They are supernatural beings, agents of divine power, operating in the mortal world under the authority and the direction of the King of the Valar. This changes everything. The eagles are not big birds that Gandalf happens to know. They are the representatives of the highest authority in the cosmos. When an eagle appears, it is not a lucky coincidence. It is an intervention, a specific, deliberate, divinely sanctioned act by a being that answers to the King of Heaven. The eagles do not choose to help. They are sent. They do not arrive by accident. They arrive by design. And the design is Manw's, the King of the Valar, watching from his throne on the peak of Tanacatil, seeing the affairs of Middle-earth with eyes that pierce distance and time, and sending his agents when the moment requires it, and not a heartbeat before. Part 2. Thorondor, the greatest eagle who ever lived. To understand the eagles as they appear in The Lord of the Rings, you have to go back, far back, to the First Age, to the time of the Great Wars against Morgoth, when the eagles were at the height of their power, and when the mightiest of their kind walked the skies of Middle-earth. Thorondor, the king of eagles. The greatest eagle who ever lived, a being whose wingspan was 30 fathoms, 180 feet, nearly the length of a football field, who nested in the peaks of the Crissaegrim, the mountain range that sheltered the hidden city of Gondolin, and who served as the guardian of the skies during the darkest period of the Elder Days. Thorondor was not a background character. He was a participant in some of the most important events of the First Age, events that shaped the history of Middle-earth and that echo through the ages all the way to the War of the Ring. When Fingolfin, the High King of the Noldor, the mightiest elf lord in Middle-earth, rode alone to the gates of Angband and challenged Morgoth to single combat, it was Thorondor who intervened at the end. Fingolfin fought Morgoth, fought the Dark Lord himself, the most powerful being in the physical world, the fallen Valar whose power dwarfed everything else in Middle-earth, and Fingolfin wounded him. 7 times Fingolfin wounded Morgoth before the Dark Lord beat him down and crushed him beneath his foot. The duel between Fingolfin and Morgoth is one of the most heroic moments in the entire legendarium. A mortal elf, however powerful, challenging the god of darkness to a fight that Fingolfin knew he could not win. He rode to Angband out of despair, out of fury, out of the agonized refusal to accept that the darkness had won, and that nothing could be done. He challenged Morgoth knowing he would die. He fought knowing he would lose. And he wounded Morgoth, cut him, bled him, hurt the Dark Lord in ways that Morgoth carried for the rest of his existence, because Fingolfin's blade was driven by the fury of a king who would rather die fighting than live in surrender. Morgoth killed Fingolfin. He crushed the elven king beneath his foot, grinding the broken body into the earth. And then Morgoth was going to defile the body, to give it to his wolves, to deny Fingolfin the dignity of a proper rest, to make the final humiliation of the High King of the Noldor a spectacle for his servants. And Thorondor descended from the sky, scarred Morgoth's face with his talons, and carried Fingolfin's body away before the wolves could defile it. Think about what this means. An eagle, a bird, attacked Morgoth, attacked the Dark Lord, scarred his face, drew the blood of the mightiest being in the physical world. No ordinary bird does this. No natural creature has the power to wound a Valar. Thorondor's attack on Morgoth is proof, definitive, undeniable proof, that the eagles are something more than animals. They are beings of spiritual power, capable of contending with the cosmic forces of the world, capable of wounding beings that are, by any mortal standard, invincible. Thorondor carried Fingolfin's body to a place high in the mountains above Gondolin, and there, on a ledge above the hidden city, the High King was laid to rest. Turgon, Fingolfin's son and the King of Gondolin, built a cairn over his father's body, and no creature of Morgoth ever disturbed the resting place, because the eagles guarded it. They maintained a vigil over the tomb of the king, protecting in death the being whose courage they had honored in life. The eagles were not merely rescue agents, they were guardians of the honorable dead, beings who understood the significance of what Fingolfin had done and who ensured that his sacrifice was remembered and respected. And Thorondor did more. He rescued Maedhros, the eldest son of Fëanor, who had been captured by Morgoth and hung by his right hand from a cliff face on the mountains of Thangorodrim. Fingon, Maedhros's cousin, travelled to Thangorodrim alone to rescue him. And when the cliff proved impossible to climb, Fingon cried out to Mandu, and Thorondor descended from the sky and bore Fingon up to the precipice where Maedhros hung. Fingon cut his friend free, and Thorondor carried them both to safety, the Eagle King serving as the answer to a prayer and the vehicle of one of the most dramatic rescues in the history of the Elder Days. Thorondor rescued Beren and Elfien. After their quest for the Silmaril, after they infiltrated Morgoth's fortress, stole the jewel from his crown, and fled through the darkness with the wolves of Angband at their heels, Thorondor and his eagles found them, wounded and unconscious, and carried them to safety. The greatest love story in Tolkien's legendarium was saved by the intervention of the Eagle King. And at the fall of Gondolin, when the hidden city was betrayed and destroyed by Morgoth's armies, it was the eagles who protected the refugees. Thorondor's eagles fought against the Balrogs in the skies above the burning city, and they guarded the escape route through the mountains, ensuring that at least some of the survivors, including the young Erendil, the mariner whose voyage to the Blessed Realm would eventually bring the Valar into the war and end Morgoth's reign, escaped the slaughter. The eagles were there at every turning point of the First Age. They were not bystanders. They were not decorative. They were agents of divine will, deployed at the moments of greatest crisis, serving as man's hands in a world that was tearing itself apart under the weight of Morgoth's evil. Part 3. Why the Eagles are not a taxi service. Now we can address the question. The real question. The question that everyone asks and that nobody seems to answer in a way that satisfies. Because most answers focus on the practical problems, the Nazgul would have intercepted them. Sauron would have seen them coming, rather than on the fundamental theological reason that the eagles could not simply fly the ring to Mordor. The reason is this: the eagles are divine agents, and divine agents are bound by rules. The Valar, the angelic powers who govern the world, are not absent from Middle-earth's affairs. They watch, they care, they are deeply invested in the outcome of the struggle against Sauron. But they do not intervene directly. They do not send armies. They do not descend from the Blessed Realm with fire and sword and the overwhelming power of the angelic host. They restrain themselves deliberately, consciously, for reasons that are rooted in the deepest principles of Tolkien's theology. Why? Because the last time the Valar intervened directly, at the end of the First Age in the War of Wrath, the intervention was catastrophic. The Valar came with their full power, and the war that followed was so destructive that it broke the continent. Beleriand, the entire northwestern region of Middle-earth, the land where the Silmarillion's stories take place, was sunk beneath the sea. The physical world was shattered by the clash between divine powers. The cure was almost worse than the disease. After the War of Wrath, the Valar changed their approach. They would no longer intervene directly in the affairs of Middle-earth. They would send agents, limited agents, constrained agents, agents who were forbidden from matching Sauron's power with equal power. The Astari, the wizards, Gandalf among them, were sent as advisors, as guides, as inspirers of resistance, explicitly forbidden from dominating the free peoples or from using their full power to simply overpower the enemy. The Eagles operate under the same constraints. They are Man-W's agents, and Man is the king of the Valar, and the Valar have chosen restraint. The Eagles can intervene. They do intervene repeatedly at critical moments, but they cannot replace the free people's struggle. They cannot be the solution. They cannot carry the ring to Mordor and throw it in the fire, because doing so would be a direct, overwhelming divine intervention of the kind that the Valar have forsworn. The Eagles appear at moments of eucatastrophe, Tolkien's word for the sudden, joyous turn in a story, the unexpected rescue, the grace that arrives when all hope seems lost. The Eagles are grace. They are divine mercy, arriving at the last possible moment, saving the day not because the heroes earned it, but because the cosmos is governed by a power that cares about the outcome and that intervenes, sparingly, at the critical juncture, in the manner that preserves the free will of the mortal actors, while ensuring that the story does not end in total darkness. There is a deeper layer to this constraint that deserves attention. The Valar's restraint is not arbitrary. It is principled, rooted in the specific, deliberate, theologically precise understanding that mortal beings must be allowed to determine their own fate. The Valar could, at any moment, intervene with overwhelming force. They could send their own armies. They could reshape the landscape. They could strike Sauron down with a thought. But they do not, because the world was made for the children of Ilúvatar, for the elves and the men whose free choices are the meaning of the story, and the Valar's intervention, however well-intentioned, would replace the children's choices with the Valar's will. The Eagles operate under this same principle. They can intervene, but they cannot replace. They can rescue, but they cannot conquer. They can provide the margin that allows the free peoples to survive, but they cannot make the decisions that the free peoples must make for themselves. The difference is subtle but essential. The Eagles do not fight the war. They attend the war. They are present. They are available. They are ready. But the fighting, the choosing, the sacrificing, the moral agency that determines the outcome must be done by the mortal actors whose world this is. The Eagles cannot fly the ring to Mordor because flying the ring to Mordor would be a Valar-level intervention, a divine act that replaces mortal agency with divine will, that solves the problem from above rather than allowing the problem to be solved from below. The Valar have forsworn this kind of intervention. The Eagles, as the Valar's agents, are bound by the same forswearing. They can descend from the heights to catch you when you fall. They cannot descend from the heights to carry you to your destiny. That walk you must make yourself. The Eagles cannot fly to Mordor because they are not tools. They are interventions. They are miracles. And miracles, by their nature, cannot be scheduled, cannot be planned, cannot be incorporated into a strategy. You cannot build a battle plan around a miracle. You cannot say the Eagles will carry the ring the way you might say the cavalry will flank from the right. Miracles do not work that way. Grace does not work that way. The divine does not work that way. Part 4. The Eagles and Gandalf. The relationship between Gandalf and the Eagles is one of the most revealing details about both parties, because it tells us something about the nature of the bond between two orders of Man-W's servants and about the specific ways in which divine agents cooperate in the affairs of Middle-earth. Gandalf is a Maya, an angelic spirit, a being of the same order as Sauron, sent to Middle-earth by the Valar as one of the Astari, the wizard emissaries tasked with inspiring resistance against the Dark Lord. Gandalf serves Mando and Varda, the king and queen of the Valar, the highest authorities in the cosmic hierarchy. The Eagles also serve Mando. They are, in a sense, Gandalf's colleagues, fellow agents of the same divine authority, operating in the same theatre of operations, pursuing the same objectives through different means. Gandalf works through counsel, through inspiration, through the kindling of courage in the hearts of mortals. The Eagles work through direct action, through rescue, through intervention, through the physical manifestation of divine power at the moments of greatest need. The relationship between Gandalf and Gwaihir, the Windlord, the Lord of the Eagles in the Third Age, is described as a friendship. Gandalf once healed Gwaihir of a poisoned wound, and the eagle remembered the debt. But the relationship goes deeper than personal friendship. It is a professional relationship, a collaboration between two agents of the same principle, two beings who serve the same master and who understand intuitively the constraints and the purposes of their shared mission. Gandalf can call on the Eagles because he is Mandw's agent, and they are Mandw's agents. The call is not a summons. Gandalf does not command the Eagles. It is a request, a communication between equals, a consultation between colleagues, a coordination between different branches of the same divine service. The Eagles come when Gandalf calls not because they owe him a favour, but because his call, informed by his understanding of Mandu's will, is itself a signal that divine intervention is warranted. This is why the Eagles always seem to arrive at exactly the right moment. They are not responding to Gandalf's panic. They are responding to the cosmic situation, the alignment of events that tells them, through their connection to Man's will, that the moment for intervention has arrived. Gandalf's call is the trigger, but the timing is Mandu's. Part 5. Gwaihir the Windlord. Gwaihir is the eagle that most readers encounter, the eagle of the Third Age, the lord of his kind during the War of the Ring, the being who rescues Gandalf from the top of Orthanc, who carries Gandalf down from the peak of Zirak-Sigil after the battle with the Balrog, and who flies to Mount Doom to rescue Frodo and Sam after the ring is destroyed. Gwaihir is described as the greatest of the eagles of his time, the swiftest, the mightiest, the most far-seeing. His name means Windlord in Sindarin, and the name is not merely a title. It describes his nature, a being of the wind, a creature of the air, a spirit whose element is the sky and whose domain is the space between the earth and the stars. But Gwaihir is also, compared to Thorondor, diminished. This is a pattern that runs through all of Tolkien's work. The diminishment of the world, the fading of the old powers, the slow decline from the grandeur of the elder days to the more modest realities of the Third Age. Thorondor's wingspan was 30 fathoms. Gwaihir's is not specified, but the implication is clear. The eagles of the Third Age are lesser than the eagles of the First, just as the elves of the Third Age are lesser than the elves of the First, just as the world of the Third Age is less magical, less potent, less connected to the divine than the world of the beginning. And yet Gwaihir is still extraordinary. He can carry a grown man in his talons, he carries Gandalf, he carries the hobbits. He can fly vast distances at tremendous speed, from the Misty Mountains to Mordor in a matter of hours. He can see from heights that would be invisible to mortal eyes, spotting Gandalf on the pinnacle of Orthanc from miles away, or locating two hobbits on the smoking slopes of Mount Doom amid the chaos of volcanic eruption. Gwaihir is, I think, one of the most underappreciated characters in The Lord of the Rings. He appears at 3 of the most critical moments in the entire story: the rescue from Orthanc, the recovery of Gandalf after the Balrog, and the rescue from Mount Doom, and each time his appearance is the difference between the success and the failure of the entire quest. Without Gwaihir, Gandalf dies on Orthanc, and the Fellowship is never formed. Without Gwaihir, Gandalf dies on Ziraxigil, and the defense of Rohan and Gondor collapses. Without Gwaihir, Frodo and Sam die on Mount Doom, and the victory, achieved at such terrible cost, is hollowed out by the loss of the beings who made it possible. And Gwaihir performed these rescues without complaint, without negotiation, without the kind of grudging, conditional, quid pro quo assistance that characterizes most alliances in Middle-earth. The eagle came because the eagle was needed. The eagle carried because the burden needed carrying. The eagle flew because the distance needed covering. There was no hesitation, no bargaining, no calculation of cost and benefit. There was simply the need and the response, the call and the answer, the falling and the catching, the divine agent fulfilling his purpose with the quiet, unhesitating competence of a being who has been doing this work since the beginning of the world. Gwaihir is the hand of providence. He is the physical manifestation of man's watching care, the proof that the King of the Valar is paying attention, that the cosmic powers are not indifferent to the suffering of the small and the brave and the faithful. Every time Gwaihir appears, the message is the same: you are not alone. The heavens are watching. And at the moment of greatest need, help will come, not because you planned for it, not because you earned it, but because the world is governed by a power that cares. Part 6. The Battle of Five Armies. The eagle's appearance at the Battle of Five Armies, the climactic battle of the Hobbit, is the first time most readers encounter the eagles in Tolkien's published works, and it is worth examining in detail because it establishes the pattern that will repeat throughout The Lord of the Rings. The Battle of Five Armies is a catastrophe in the making. The armies of the dwarves, the men of Lake Town, and the wood elves are gathered before the gates of the Lonely Mountain, quarrelling over the treasure of Smaug. They are on the verge of fighting each other when a greater threat arrives, the armies of the goblins and the wargs descending from the misty mountains, intent on seizing the treasure and destroying everyone in their path. The free peoples unite against the common enemy. They fight. They struggle. They are losing. The goblins are too numerous, the wargs too fierce, the battle too desperate. Thorin Oakenshield leads a final charge from the gates of Erebor, and the tide turns briefly, but the outcome is still in doubt. The free peoples are being overwhelmed. And then the eagles come. The eagles. The eagles. The cry goes up across the battlefield, and the eagles descend, Gwaihir and his kin sweeping down from the mountains, striking the goblins from the air, breaking their formations, turning the tide of battle at the moment when defeat seems inevitable. The pattern is clear, and it is the same pattern that will repeat at the Black Gate. The eagles arrive at the last possible moment, when all hope seems lost, when the free peoples have done everything they can and it is not enough. The eagles do not arrive at the beginning of the battle. They do not arrive in the middle. They arrive at the end, at the moment of despair, at the point of no return, at the instant when the difference between victory and defeat is measured in heartbeats. This is not a coincidence. This is the theology. The eagles are grace, and grace in Tolkien's understanding does not replace effort. It supplements it. It completes it. It arrives after the mortal actors have done everything they can, after they have fought and suffered and sacrificed to the limit of their capacity, and it provides the final, decisive push that turns hopeless struggle into miraculous victory. The eagles do not fight your battles for you. They finish them. And they finish them only when you have proven, through your own effort and your own sacrifice that the battle is worth finishing. Part 7. The Rescue from Orthanc. Gandalf's rescue from the pinnacle of Orthanc is one of the most important eagle moments in The Lord of the Rings, and it is also one of the most revealing, because it shows us the specific mechanism by which divine intervention operates in Tolkien's world. Gandalf went to Isengard seeking counsel from Saruman, the head of his order, the White Wizard, the being who was supposed to be the leader of the resistance against Sauron. And Saruman betrayed him. Saruman had been corrupted by the Palantir, by his own ambition, by the slow, seductive logic of power that convinced him that the wise course was to join the winning side. Saruman imprisoned Gandalf on the pinnacle of Orthanc, the great tower of Isengard, hundreds of feet high, a needle of black stone with no stairs and no doors on the outside. Gandalf was trapped. He was the most important agent of the Valar in Middle-earth, the being whose counsel and whose courage were essential to the resistance against Sauron. And he was imprisoned, helpless, unable to act, unable to warn anyone about Saruman's treachery or about the threat that was gathering in the east. And Gwaihir came. The eagle came to Orthanc, not because Gandalf called, Geralf had no way to call, but because the eagle was sent. Gandalf had asked Radagast, the brown wizard, to send word to the eagles that he needed their help. Radagast, unaware of Saruman's treachery, had passed the message along. And Gwaihir came, the Windlord, carrying Gandalf away from the prison on the pinnacle, carrying the most important being in Middle-earth to freedom and to the continuation of his mission. The mechanism is precise. Gandalf asked for help through a mortal channel. The help arrived through a divine channel. The mortal effort, Gandalf's request, Radagast's message, was necessary but not sufficient. The divine intervention, Gwaihir's flight, was necessary but not initiated by Gandalf's power or Gandalf's authority. It was initiated by the alignment of mortal need and divine will, by the cosmic situation that told Manno, through whatever means the King of the Valar uses to monitor the affairs of Middle-earth, that the moment for intervention had arrived. This is how grace works in Tolkien. It is not magic. It is not a spell that you cast or a favor that you call in. It is a response, a divine response to a mortal situation that has reached the point where divine involvement is warranted. You cannot command grace. You can only create the conditions in which grace might appear. And the eagles are the physical form of that grace, the wings and the talons of a divine response that arrives when the cosmic situation demands it. Part 8. The Recovery from Ziraxagil. The second rescue of Gandalf by Gwaihir is, I think, the most theologically significant of all the eagle moments, because it occurs in the context of Gandalf's death and resurrection, the most explicitly supernatural event in the entire Lord of the Rings. Gandalf fell in Moria. He fell fighting the Balrog, the demon of the ancient world, the corrupted Maya, the fire spirit of Morgoth, and the fall took them both down into the deepest places of the earth, below the foundations of the mountains, into the darkness where the world is oldest. And they fought for days through the dark, up the endless stairway that led from the roots of the mountain to the peak of Ziraxagil, the highest point of the Misty Mountains. Gandalf defeated the Balrog. He struck it down on the peak of the mountain, and the Balrog fell, and the mountain shook, and Gandalf himself collapsed, spent, exhausted, drained of every ounce of his strength by the most demanding battle of his existence. And Gandalf died. He did not merely lose consciousness, he died. His spirit left his body. He passed through death, through the experience that the Astari, despite their angelic nature, were subject to in their incarnate forms. Gandalf the Grey died on the peak of Ziraxagil, and he was sent back. Ilvatar, the creator, The god of Tolkien's world, the ultimate authority, sent Gandalf back, not the Valar. Ilúvatar himself. Gandalf was too important to the cosmic plan, and his mission was not complete, and the Creator intervened directly. The only clear instance of direct divine intervention by Ilúvatar in the entire Third Age, to return Gandalf to life, enhanced, transformed, Gandalf the White instead of Gandalf the Grey. And when Gandalf returned, when he opened his eyes on the peak of the mountain, naked, disoriented, reborn, Gwaihir found him. The eagle came to the peak of Xeraxagil and found the resurrected wizard lying on the stone, and he carried Gandalf to Lothlorien, to Galadriel, to safety and to healing, and to the continuation of the mission that Ilúvatar had deemed too important to abandon. Gwaihir's role in this sequence is not merely practical, a weakened wizard to safety. It is theological. Gwaihir is the connection, the link between the divine act of resurrection and the mortal world where the resurrected being must continue his work. Ilúvatar sends Gandalf back. Gwaihir carries him home. The Creator restores the spirit. The eagle restores the body to the world. The vertical axis, God to mine, is completed by the horizontal axis, and the mechanism of completion is the eagle, the being who bridges the gap between heaven and earth, between the divine and the mortal, between the cosmic purpose and the practical reality. Part 9. The Black Gate. The eagle's appearance at the Battle of the Morannon, the Black Gate of Mordor, the final battle of the War of the Ring, is the most dramatic of all their interventions, and it is the one that most clearly demonstrates their role as agents of divine will, operating at the fulcrum point of history. Aragorn led his army to the Black Gate, knowing it was a diversion, knowing that the 7,000 men of the West could not defeat Sauron's forces, knowing that the battle was a sacrifice designed to draw Sauron's attention away from the real threat. Frodo and Sam, crawling through the ash wastes of Gorgoroth, carrying the ring toward Mount Doom. The army was surrounded, outnumbered many times over. The orcs closed in from every side. The trolls advanced. The Nazgûl circled overhead. The battle was going exactly as Sauron intended. The army of the West was being destroyed, ground to pieces by overwhelming force, and there was nothing that Aragorn or Gandalf or anyone else could do to change the mathematical reality of the situation. And then the eagles came. They came from the north, Gwaihir and Landroval, and a great host of their kindred, sweeping down from the mountains, engaging the Nazgûl in aerial combat, fighting the fell beasts in the skies above the Morannon. The eagles attacked the Nazgûl, the most terrifying servants of Sauron, the beings that no mortal warrior could face without breaking, and they fought them to a standstill. The aerial combat above the Black Gate is one of the great unwritten set pieces of The Lord of the Rings, a battle in the sky, fought at speeds and altitudes that no ground-based observer could fully comprehend, between the mightiest servants of the divine and the most terrible agents of darkness. The eagles, beings of wind and light and the authority of man, against the Nazgûl on their fell beasts, beings of shadow and terror and the dominating will of Sauron. The sky over the Morannon was, for those few minutes, a battlefield, a contested space where the forces of grace and the forces of domination clashed in the medium that the eagles had claimed as their own since the beginning of the world. The eagles did not merely fight the Nazgûl, they contested the sky. They denied Sauron aerial dominance. They prevented the Nazgûl from swooping down on the beleaguered army of the West and breaking the mortal soldiers with the supernatural terror that was the Nazgûl's primary weapon. The eagles were, in military terms, performing air superiority operations, clearing the sky, maintaining control of the aerial domain, ensuring that the ground forces could continue to fight without being overwhelmed from above. This is a function that only the eagles could perform. No mortal force had the capability to challenge the Nazgul in the air. The fell beasts were beyond the reach of archers. The Nazgul's terror was beyond the resistance of ordinary soldiers. Only the eagles, beings of comparable spiritual authority, agents of a power that matched and exceeded Sauron's, could contend with the Nazgul in their own element and prevail. And then the ring was destroyed, and the Nazgul, drawn by Sauron's desperate will, abandoned the battle and flew toward Mount Doom, and the fell beasts crumbled in flight, and the Nazgul dissolved, and Sauron's army broke, and the battle was won. The eagle's arrival at the Black Gate is timed with the precision of a cosmic clockwork. They arrive at the moment when the battle is lost. They arrive at the moment when Aragorn's diversion has served its purpose, when the army of the West has bought the time that Frodo needed, when the sacrifice is about to be completed, when the last act of the drama is playing out on the slopes of Mount Doom. The eagles do not arrive to win the battle. They arrive to ensure that the battle lasts long enough for the ring to be destroyed. This is the key distinction. The eagles are not the victory. They are the margin. They are the extra minutes, the additional resistance, the breathing room that allows the real victory, the destruction of the ring by Frodo and Gollum, to happen. The eagles do not replace the mortal effort. They complete it. They provide the final, necessary increment of force that keeps the situation viable long enough for the cosmic purpose to be fulfilled. Part 10. The Rescue from Mount Doom. The rescue of Frodo and Sam from the slopes of Mount Doom is the most emotionally powerful eagle moment in the entire story. And it is also the most theologically significant, because it represents the most direct and most unambiguous act of divine mercy in The Lord of the Rings. The ring is destroyed, Sauron is overthrown, the quest is complete. And Frodo and Sam are stranded, trapped on the slopes of a volcano that is erupting around them, surrounded by rivers of lava, choking on ash and fume, with no way out, no way down, no possibility of survival. They have given everything, every ounce of strength, every reserve of courage, every drop of the stubborn, hobbit-hearted refusal to quit that has carried them from the Shire to the crack of doom. And it is not enough. They are going to die. And then the eagles come. Gwaihir and Landroval and Meneldor, 3 eagles, sent by Gandalf, flying into the destruction of Mordor, into the ash cloud and the fire and the collapsing landscape, to rescue 2 hobbits from the slopes of a dying mountain. 3 eagles for 2 hobbits. Gandalf sent 3 eagles because he did not know if both hobbits were still alive, and he wanted to ensure that there was an eagle for each survivor and a spare for the possibility that the bearers of the ring might need special care. The detail is small but revealing. Gandalf's instruction to the eagles was not go save the hobbits. It was go find them, bring them back, be prepared for the worst. The care and the specificity of the instruction tell us that Gandalf was not making a casual request. He was orchestrating a rescue, a precise, carefully planned retrieval operation conducted by divine agents, aimed at the specific objective of saving the 2 beings who had sacrificed more than any others in the war against Sauron. Gandalf sent the eagles to Mount Doom while the battle at the Black Gate was still raging. He sent them before the ring was destroyed, before the outcome was certain, before the victory was confirmed. He sent them on the faith that the quest would succeed, that Frodo would reach the fire, that the ring would be unmade. And he sent them because he knew, with the certainty of a Maya who understands the cosmic pattern, who can feel the shape of the story moving toward its conclusion, that the ring would be destroyed, and that when it was, the hobbits would be stranded on a dying mountain, and that no one would come for them unless he sent someone now. The urgency of the sending tells us something about Gandalf's heart. He was not thinking about strategy in that moment. He was thinking about Frodo and Sam, about two hobbits he loved, two small beings he had sent into the worst place in the world, two friends who had done everything he had asked of them, and who deserved, at the end of everything, to be carried home. The rescue from Mount Doom is grace at its purest. The hobbits did not earn the rescue through strategic planning or military prowess. They earned it through faithfulness, through the simple, stubborn, extraordinary act of carrying the ring into the fire, of doing the impossible because the impossible was what was needed, of giving everything they had with no expectation of survival or reward. And the eagles are the response to that faithfulness, the divine acknowledgement that the sacrifice is seen, that the effort is recognized, that the cosmos does not allow the faithful to perish without an attempt at salvation. Sam looks up at the sky. He sees the eagles, and he passes out, not from fear, not from shock, but from the overwhelming relief of a being who has been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders and who can finally let go. The eagles are here. The rescue is happening. And for the first time since the Shire, since the beginning of the journey, since the moment when Sam first decided to follow Frodo into the darkness, for the first time, Sam can rest. Part 11. Landroval and the Others. Gwaihir is the most famous eagle, but he is not the only one. Landroval, described as Gwaihir's brother and the second greatest eagle of his time, appears at both the Black Gate and the rescue from Mount Doom. Meneldur, described as a young and swift eagle, is the third member of the rescue party at Mount Doom. These names matter. In a story where most eagles appear as an undifferentiated group, the eagles came, the eagles fought. The naming of specific eagles tells us that these are individual beings, with individual identities, individual roles, individual significance. They are not a flock. They are a company, a group of distinct, named, significant beings, each with their own personality and their own purpose. Landroval's name is significant. It means wide wing in Sindarin, echoing the name of his ancestor, for Landroval was, according to Tolkien, the descendant, or perhaps the brother, in the sense of being of the same order of the great eagles who had served in the First Age. The continuity is important. The eagles are not a random species that happens to show up at critical moments. They are a lineage, a succession of great beings, maintaining the same watch, fulfilling the same purpose, generation after generation, age after age, from the time of Thorondor to the time of Gwaihir. This lineage connects the eagles to the deep history of Middle-earth in a way that most readers do not appreciate. When Gwaihir flies to Mount Doom, he is continuing a tradition that began when Thorondor scarred Morgoth's face and rescued Fingolfin's body from the gates of Angband. The eagle who carries Frodo is the heir of the eagle who carried Beren and Elthian. The intervention at the Black Gate is the continuation of the intervention at the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. The eagle's story is not episodic. It is continuous. It is a single ongoing mission, maintained across ages, executed by a succession of great beings who serve the same master and who fulfill the same cosmic purpose. Part 12. The Eagles and Speech. One of the most overlooked details about the eagles, and one of the most important for understanding their nature, is that they speak. They have language. They communicate in the common speech, and in Sindarin, they hold conversations, they express opinions, they demonstrate intelligence and personality and individual will. Gwaihir speaks to Gandalf. He speaks not as an animal performing a trick, but as a being of equal or near equal standing, a colleague, an ally, a fellow servant of Manu who can engage in rational discussion, assess situations, express concerns, and make decisions. When Gwaihir carries Gandalf from Orthanc, the dialogue between them is the dialogue of two intelligent beings coordinating their actions, not the dialogue of a man and his pet. This is crucial. Animals do not speak in Tolkien's world, or rather, when animals speak, as in the case of Huan the wolfhound, who is permitted to speak 3 times, it is a sign that the animal is not really an animal, but a being of greater than animal nature. The eagle's capacity for speech is the most accessible proof that they are not ordinary creatures, that they are intelligent, ensouled, spiritually significant beings who happen to inhabit the bodies of enormous birds. And their speech is not simple. The eagles do not speak in grunts or single words. They speak in complete, articulate, nuanced sentences. They report intelligence. They express strategic assessments. They communicate complex information about the state of the world and the progress of events. Their speech demonstrates a level of cognitive capability that places them firmly in the category of rational beings. Beings with minds, with will, with the capacity for judgment and decision-making that characterizes the highest order of creation. When the eagle cries, the eagles are coming. At the Battle of 5 Armies, the cry is not a call of nature. It is a battle announcement, a declaration of intent, a communication to allies and enemies alike that a new force has entered the field. The eagles announce themselves because they are not animals arriving by instinct. They are warriors arriving by decision. They choose to intervene. They choose to fight. They choose to serve the cosmic purpose that Manu has assigned to them. And they announce their choice with a voice that every being on the battlefield can hear and understand. Part 13. The lifespan of the eagles. How long do the eagles live? This is a question that Tolkien does not answer directly, but the available evidence suggests an answer that reinforces our understanding of their supernatural nature. Thorondor was active throughout the First Age, from the early wars against Morgoth to the War of Wrath at the end of the Age. The First Age spans approximately 600 years of recorded history, the years of the sun in Beleriand, and Thorondor was present and active for much or all of this period. If Thorondor existed before the recorded history, if he was created by Manwë at the beginning of the world, as some passages suggest, then his lifespan would extend to the creation of Arda itself. Gwaihir, the eagle of the Third Age, is described as the greatest of his time, but his relationship to Thorondor is not clearly defined. Is Gwaihir Thorondor's descendant, his successor, a different being entirely? Tolkien does not say. But the implication, the suggestion of a lineage, of a succession, of a continuity of purpose maintained across ages, suggests that the eagles, like the elves, operate on a timescale that transcends mortal understanding. If the eagles are Maiar, spirits who have taken eagle form, then they are immortal in the same sense that the Astari are immortal. Their spirits are eternal, even if their physical forms can be destroyed. An eagle killed in battle would not cease to exist. Its spirit would continue, returning, perhaps, to man's halls in the Blessed Realm, or taking a new form, or existing in the spiritual realm without physical embodiment. If the eagles are created beings rather than Maiar, their lifespan is still extraordinary. The continuity of the eagle lineage across thousands of years, from Thorondor in the First Age to Gwaihir in the Third, suggests either extreme longevity or a rate of reproduction and maturation that maintains the lineage without interruption. Either way, the eagles operate on a time scale that places them closer to the elves and the Ents than to any mortal creature. The lifespan matters because it shapes the eagle's perspective. A being that lives for thousands of years sees the world differently than a being that lives for decades. The eagles have the long view, the perspective that comes from watching civilizations rise and fall, from seeing the same patterns repeat across centuries, from understanding that the crisis of the moment is part of a larger pattern that extends backward and forward in time beyond the horizon of mortal perception. This long view is part of what makes the eagles such effective agents of Mando. They do not react to events with the urgency and the panic of beings who have only decades to live. They respond with the measured, considered, long-perspective judgment of beings who have seen crises before and who know, from experience, from observation, from the deep patience of their age, that the moment for intervention is the moment when intervention will produce lasting results, not the moment when the crisis is at its most dramatic. Part 14. The Rescue of Maedhros, Up Close. The rescue of Maedhros from Thangorodrim is worth examining in more detail, because it is one of the most dramatic and most revealing of all the eagle moments in the First Age. Maedhros, the eldest son of Fëanor, the fiercest of the Noldoran princes, a warrior of extraordinary ability and extraordinary pride, had been captured by Morgoth in the earliest days of the wars in Beleriand. Morgoth had offered peace, and Maedhros had come to parley, and Morgoth had betrayed the parley and seized Maedhros and taken him to Thangorodrim, the great mountain fortress. The peaks of slag and ash above the underground halls of Angband, and there, on the sheer face of the highest precipice, Morgoth had hung Maedhros by his right wrist from a band of steel, and left him there to suffer. Maedhros hung on the cliff for years. Not days. Not weeks. Years. The suffering is beyond imagining. The exposure to the elements. The weight of the body pulling against the steel band. The slow, grinding, relentless torment of a being who cannot die, because elves do not die from privation, but who cannot escape, who is trapped in an agony that has no end and no relief. And Fingon came for him. Fingon, Maedhros's cousin, his closest friend, the one person in the world who refused to accept that Maedhros was lost. Fingon travelled to Thangorodrim alone, against the greatest fortress of the Dark Lord, with nothing but a bow and a harp and the stubborn, unbreakable conviction that his friend was still alive, and that the bonds of friendship could not be broken by the power of Morgoth. Fingon could not reach Maedhros. The cliff was too high, the precipice too sheer, the fortress too heavily guarded for any approach from below. And Fingon did the only thing he could think of. He sang. He played his harp, and he sang. A song of the blessed realm. A song of the beauty that they had left behind. A song that carried across the distance and the darkness and the desolation of Thangorodrim. And Maedhros heard, and Maedhros sang back, a faint, broken, barely audible reply from the height of the cliff, a voice that had been screaming for years reduced to a whisper, but a whisper that Fingon could hear. Because friendship has better ears than any instrument. But Fingon still could not reach him. The cliff was impossible. The distance was impossible. The physics of the situation were impossible. And Fingon, in his desperation, cried out to Manwë, prayed, essentially to the king of the Valar, asking for help that no mortal power could provide. And Thorondor came. The King of Eagles, sent by Manwë in response to Fingon's prayer, descended from the sky and carried Fingon to the cliff face where Maedhros hung. And Fingon, unable to free Maedhros from the steel band, cut off Maedhros's right hand, severed it at the wrist, freeing his friend from the iron at the cost of the hand, and Thorondor carried them both to safety. The rescue of Maedhros is the template for every subsequent eagle rescue. The pattern is all here. The mortal effort, Horfolon's journey to Thangorodrim. The mortal limit, the impossibility of reaching the cliff. The prayer, Rai to Mao. The divine response, Thor descent. The rescue, the flight to safety, and the cost, the loss of the cunt. The pattern tells us that grace is real, but that grace is not free. That the rescue comes, but that the rescue does not undo the damage, does not erase the suffering, does not restore what was lost. Maedhros is saved, but Maedhros's hand is gone. The rescue is real, but the cost is real. And the two coexist, the grace and the wound, the salvation and the scar, the eagle and the stump. Part 15. The Eagles in the War of Wrath. The greatest military deployment of the Eagles in the history of Middle-earth occurred at the end of the First Age, in the War of Wrath, the final. Cataclysmic conflict between the Valar and Morgoth that ended the Elder Days and reshaped the physical geography of the world. The War of Wrath was the only time in the history of Middle-earth when the full power of the Valar was unleashed against the forces of darkness. The host of the West, the armies of the Valar, led by the Maiar, accompanied by the Vanyar the Elves who had remained in the Blessed Realm, crossed the sea and made war on Morgoth in his fortress of Angband. The war lasted 40 years and was fought on a scale that dwarfs every other conflict in the legendarium. And the Eagles were there. Thorondor and his kindred fought in the War of Wrath, fought in the skies above the battlefields, fought against the winged dragons that Morgoth unleashed in his final desperate defense. The climactic moment of the War of Wrath, the specific combat that decided the outcome, was an aerial battle between Erendil, flying in his skyship Vingelot, with a Silmaril on his brow, and Ancalagan the Black, the greatest of the winged dragons, the most terrifying creature Morgoth ever made. And the Eagles fought alongside Erendil, Thorondor and his Eagles engaging the lesser dragons, clearing the sky, creating the conditions for Erendil to face Ancalagan in single combat and to strike him down. The Eagles' role in the War of Wrath is military in a way that their later appearances are not. In the First Age, the Eagles are warriors, participants in a divine war, fighting alongside the armies of the Valar with the full sanction and the full power of their nature. They are not constrained. They are not limited. They fight with everything they have, and their fighting is part of a divine military operation that has been sanctioned by the highest authorities in the cosmos. This changes in the later ages. After the War of Wrath, after the Cataclysm, after the sinking of Beleriand, after the Valar learned the cost of direct intervention, the Eagles' role shifts from military to miraculous. They are no longer warriors in a divine army. They are agents of grace, intervening at critical moments, providing the margin of survival rather than the overwhelming force of victory. The Eagles of the Third Age are the same kind of being as the Eagles of the First Age, but their mandate has changed. From fight the war to watch the world and intervene when the moment demands it. Part 16. Why the Eagles cannot be controlled. There is a detail about the Eagles that is essential to understanding why they cannot simply be used as a weapon or a transport system. The Eagles are sovereign. They are not domesticated. They are not tamed. They do not take orders from men or elves or dwarves or hobbits. They serve man, and man alone. Their loyalty is to the King of the Valar, not to any mortal authority, not to any mortal cause, not to any mortal leader regardless of how powerful or how righteous that leader might be. Gandalf does not command the Eagles. He requests their help, and they grant it, because Gandalf is, like them, a servant of Manbu, and because Gandalf's requests are aligned with Manbu's purposes. But the Eagles are under no obligation to comply. They are not subordinates. They are collaborators, independent agents, exercising their own judgment, responding to Gandalf's requests based on their own assessment of the situation and their own understanding of Mandu's will. This sovereignty is crucial. It means that the eagles cannot be incorporated into a mortal strategy. You cannot plan a military campaign that depends on eagle support, because the eagles might not come. They might judge that the situation does not warrant their intervention. They might decide that the moment is not right, that the mortal actors have not yet exhausted their own resources, that divine intervention is not yet needed. The eagles are not a reliable military asset. They are an unreliable miracle, a grace that might appear and might not. That cannot be summoned or scheduled or guaranteed. And this unreliability is not a flaw, it is a feature. It is the essential characteristic of grace, the characteristic that separates grace from service, that separates divine intervention from mortal assistance. Grace is not reliable. Grace is not predictable. Grace is not something you can count on, plan for, or incorporate into your calculations. Grace is, by its nature, beyond your control, a gift from a power that is greater than you, arriving according to a logic that is not your logic, serving purposes that are larger than your purposes. The eagles are grace with wings. And grace cannot be domesticated. Part 17. The eagles and the ring. There is a specific reason, beyond the theological constraints we have discussed, why the eagles could not carry the ring to Mordor. And it is a reason that is grounded in the specific mechanics of the ring itself. The ring corrupts. This is its fundamental nature, its defining characteristic, the thing that makes it dangerous above all other weapons. The ring does not merely sit passively on its bearer's finger. It actively works to corrupt, seeking out ambition, exploiting desire, magnifying the bearer's existing will to power until the will overwhelms the person and the ring takes control. The ring corrupts in proportion to the bearer's power. This is stated clearly by Gandalf. The greater the bearer's native power, the more dangerous the ring becomes. Because the ring amplifies and corrupts the will of its bearer, and a more powerful bearer has more will to corrupt. This is why Gandalf refuses the ring. This is why Galadriel refuses the ring. This is why Aragorn refuses the ring. The beings with the greatest power, the beings who could, theoretically, use the ring most effectively, are the beings who are most vulnerable to its corruption. The eagles are beings of enormous power. They are Maiar, or Maiar-adjacent spiritual beings of the same order as the wizards, created or sanctioned by man himself. Their native power is immense, and the ring in the possession of a being of immense power would be catastrophically dangerous, more dangerous perhaps than the ring in the hands of Sauron himself, because an eagle ring lord would combine the spiritual authority of Mandu's service with the dominating power of the ring, creating a being of terrifying and unprecedented capability. An eagle carrying the ring to Mordor would be an eagle being corrupted by the ring. The corruption would begin the moment the ring was placed in the eagle's keeping. The subtle, insidious, irresistible pull of the ring working on the eagle's will, exploiting the eagle's power, twisting the eagle's purpose from destroy the ring to use the ring. And an eagle using the ring. An eagle who had been corrupted, who had become a ring lord, who had combined the aerial dominance of the greatest birds in Middle-earth with the dominating power of the One Ring, would be a terror beyond imagining. This is why the ring was given to a hobbit. Hobbits have no ambition. Hobbits have no power. Hobbits are, in the framework of the ring's corruption, the least corruptible beings in Middle-earth, not because they are morally superior, but because they have nothing for the ring to work with. The ring corrupts through ambition, and hobbits have no ambition beyond a good meal, a warm fire, and the company of friends. The ring amplifies the will to power, and hobbits have no will to power. The ring is, in the hands of a hobbit, at its least dangerous. Not harmless Low is corrupted, in the end, at the crack of doom, but less dangerous than it would be in the hands of any being with greater native power. The eagles, by contrast, are among the most powerful beings in Middle-earth. The ring in the possession of an eagle would be the ring at its most dangerous, amplifying the eagle's vast power, corrupting the eagle's divine mandate, turning a servant of Manu into a servant of the ring. The very qualities that make the eagles great, their power, their authority, their connection to the divine, are the qualities that make them the worst possible ring bearers. Part 18. The Eagles and Sauron. There is a practical dimension to the Eagle-Mordor question that deserves attention alongside the theological and the ring corruption arguments, the military reality of trying to fly a ring bearer into Mordor on the back of an eagle. Sauron was not unprepared for aerial threats. He had the Nazgul, 9-fell beast riding ringwraiths, beings of tremendous power, specifically equipped for aerial combat. He had archers, orc archers, trained to shoot at flying targets, positioned on the walls and the towers of Mordor's defences. He had the eye, the searching gaze of the Dark Lord himself, capable of detecting the ring's presence across vast distances and of directing his forces to intercept any threat. An eagle carrying the ring-bearer into Mordor would have been detected instantly. The ring's presence, so close to its maker, in such an exposed position, would have blazed like a signal fire in Sauron's awareness. The Nazgul would have been deployed immediately, all 9 of them, riding their fell beasts, converging on the ring-bearer from every direction. The orc archers would have opened fire. Sauron's full attention, the concentrated, terrifying, will-crushing attention of the Dark Lord, would have been focused on the approaching eagle with an intensity that no living being could have withstood. The eagle would have been outmatched. A single eagle, or even a group of eagles, against 9 Nazgul, with the full support of Mordor's ground-based defences, in airspace that Sauron controlled and that he had the ability to fill with darkness and volcanic fume, the odds are not good. The eagles are powerful, but they are not invincible. They can be wounded. They can be killed. And a mission that required them to fly directly into the most heavily defended airspace in Middle-earth, carrying the most important object in the world, against an enemy who was specifically prepared and specifically equipped to intercept exactly this kind of threat, this mission would almost certainly have failed. The quest succeeded because it was unexpected. Sauron did not expect 2 hobbits to walk into Mordor through the back door. He did not imagine that the ring would be carried by beings too small and too insignificant to register on his strategic radar. The ring reached Mount Doom because the ring-bearer was invisible. Not because he wore the ring, he did not, until the very end. But because he was a hobbit, and hobbits are invisible to the powerful. Because the powerful do not think in terms of hobbits. An eagle flying into Mordor would have been the opposite of invisible. It would have been the most visible possible approach, a giant, divine, ring-carrying bird, flying directly at the most powerful being in Middle-earth, announcing its presence to every sensor and every agent in Sauron's vast intelligence network. The stealth that made the quest possible would have been replaced by the spectacle that would have made the quest impossible. Part 19. Eucatastrophe. Tolkien invented a word for what the eagles represent, and the word is eucatastrophe. It is one of the most important concepts in his entire body of work, and understanding it is essential to understanding the eagle's role in the story. Eucatastrophe, the sudden, joyous turn. The moment when the story seems darkest, when all hope is lost, when the night is deepest and the dawn seems impossible, and then, suddenly, unexpectedly, from a direction no one anticipated, salvation arrives. The turn is not earned in the conventional sense. It is not the result of the hero's planning or the hero's strength. It is grace, a gift from beyond the story, an intervention from a power that is greater than the forces arrayed against the heroes, a moment of cosmic mercy that transforms despair into joy. The eagles are eucatastrophe with feathers. Every one of their appearances, the Battle of Five Armies, the rescue from Orthanc, the recovery from Ziraxagil, the Black Gate, Mount Doom, follows the same pattern. The situation is hopeless. The heroes have done everything they can. Defeat is imminent, and then the eagles appear. The turn, the joy, the sudden miraculous reversal that transforms the darkest moment into the brightest. Tolkien wrote about eucatastrophe in his essay On Fairy Stories, delivered as a lecture in 1939, the same year that The Hobbit was still being read by the public and The Lord of the Rings was beginning to take shape in Tolkien's mind. In the essay, he argues that the eucatastrophe is the highest function of the fairy story, the thing that makes fairy stories not merely entertaining, but true, in a deep and specific sense. The eucatastrophe, Tolkien argued, is a reflection of the greatest eucatastrophe of all, the resurrection. The moment when the story of the world seemed darkest, when all hope seemed lost, when death seemed to have won, and then, suddenly, unexpectedly, the stone was rolled away and the dead man walked out of the tomb. The eagles are Tolkien's literary expression of this theology. They are the resurrection made physical, the divine intervention that arrives at the moment of despair, the grace that cannot be predicted or planned or earned but that comes anyway. Because the world is governed by a power that does not abandon its creation to the darkness. This does not mean that the eagles are a deus ex machina, a lazy plot device, a convenient rescue that undermines the drama of the story. The eucatastrophe is not a cheat. It is the point. It is the thing that the entire story has been building toward, the moment when the accumulated suffering and sacrifice and faithfulness of the mortal actors creates the conditions in which grace can appear. The eagles do not replace the hero's effort. They crown it. They complete it. They are the final, transcendent response to a mortal effort that has reached its limit and that has been found worthy of completion by a power that sees more than the heroes can see, and that acts according to a logic that the heroes cannot understand. Part 20. The Eagles and the Hobbits. The relationship between the eagles and the hobbits, the divine agents and the most mortal of mortals, is one of the great structural ironies of Tolkien's work and deserves careful examination. The eagles are the most powerful mobile beings in Middle-earth, aside from the Valar themselves. The hobbits are the least powerful. The eagles are divine. The hobbits are painfully, beautifully mortal. The eagles see the world from above, from the heights, from the perspective of the gods. The hobbits see the world from below, from the ground, from the perspective of the small and the ordinary and the overlooked. And yet it is the hobbits who accomplish the mission that the eagles cannot. The ring is carried to Mount Doom not by divine agents, but by mortal halflings. Not by the powerful, but by the powerless. Not by the great, but by the small. Not by beings who see the world from the perspective of the gods, but by beings who see the world from the perspective of the garden and the kitchen and the pub. This is not a coincidence. It is the central theological statement of the entire Lord of the Rings. The powerful cannot save the world. Only the small can save the world. Only the humble, the overlooked, the beings who have no ambition and no power and no place in the strategic calculations of the great, only these beings can carry the weapon of the enemy to its destruction, because only these beings are resistant to the weapon's corruption. The eagles cannot carry the ring. The hobbits can. And the reason is not that the hobbits are stronger than the eagles. It is that the hobbits are weaker, and weakness, in Tolkien's theology, is a kind of strength. The weakness that makes the hobbits useless in combat makes them resistant to the ring's corruption. The smallness that makes them invisible to Sauron's strategic calculus makes them the perfect infiltrators. The ordinariness that makes them unremarkable in every conventional sense makes them extraordinary in the one sense that matters. The sense in which the world is saved not by the exercise of power, but by the renunciation of it. The eagles and the hobbits are complementary, two halves of the same divine strategy. The hobbits carry the ring because they are the only beings who can carry it without being destroyed by it. The eagles provide the margin of survival, the rescues, the interventions, the moments of grace that keep the hobbits alive long enough to complete their mission. The hobbits do the walking, the eagles do the catching, and between them, between the divine and the mortal, the powerful and the powerless, the wings and the feet, the world is saved. Part 21. The eagles Ares. The eagles of the Third Age made their home in the misty mountains, in the high peaks, in the inaccessible reaches of the mountain range that forms the spine of Middle-earth. Their eyries were located in the mountains north of the Eagle's Pass, in a region that was virtually inaccessible to any ground-based traveller. The location is significant. The Misty Mountains are the geographic backbone of Middle-earth, the dividing line between east and west, between the settled lands and the wild lands, between the known world and the unknown. The eagles, by making their home at the peak of this divide, positioned themselves as watchers, beings who could see both sides of the world, who could observe the movements of armies and the migrations of peoples, who could monitor the affairs of Middle-earth from a vantage point that no ground-based observer could match. The eyries were natural, rocky ledges and caves in the high peaks, shaped by weather and time, not by craftsmanship. The eagles did not build. They did not construct. They did not shape their environment the way the elves or the dwarves or even the hobbits did. They inhabited the natural landscape. They used the world as they found it, without modification, without improvement, without the desire to impose their will on the physical environment. This is consistent with their nature as divine agents. The eagles are not builders. They are watchers. They do not create civilizations or construct monuments or establish kingdoms. They observe. They intervene when necessary. They maintain their watch from the heights, seeing the world as the world is, without the desire to change it that characterizes the elves and the men and the other peoples of Middle-earth. The eagles had a relationship with the surrounding landscape, a relationship that extended beyond mere habitation to something more like stewardship. The eagles of the Misty Mountains hunted the wild goats and the mountain sheep that inhabited the high pastures. They kept the orc populations in check. The goblins of the Misty Mountains feared the eagles, and this fear limited the goblins' ability to operate on the surface and forced them underground, into the tunnels and the caverns that became their habitat. This stewardship role is one of the eagles' least appreciated functions. They were not merely watchers. They were guardians, beings whose presence in the Misty Mountains created a balance of power that kept the goblins contained, that protected the passes, that maintained a minimum of order in a wild and dangerous region. Without the eagles, the Misty Mountains would have been far more dangerous. The goblins would have ranged freely over the surface, the passes would have been effectively closed, and the east-west traffic that was essential to the economic and political life of Middle-earth would have been severely disrupted. Part 22. The Eagles in The Hobbit. A closer look. The eagles' appearance in The Hobbit, their rescue of Gandalf, Bilbo and the dwarves from the trees where the wargs and the goblins had trapped them, is often dismissed as a convenient plot device. But a closer examination reveals something more complex and more interesting. Gandalf is trapped. He and the dwarves have been chased up trees by wargs, great evil wolves, and the goblins are setting fire to the trees. The situation is desperate. The trees are burning. The wargs are circling below. The goblins are cheering. Death is imminent. And Gandalf does something that is easy to overlook in the excitement of the rescue. He communicates with the eagles. In The Hobbit, Tolkien describes Gandalf as being terribly afraid and as calling on the last desperate resource available to him. The Lord of the Eagles has been watching, from the heights, from the distance, observing the commotion in the forest below. And the Lord of the Eagles decides to investigate. The Lord of the Eagles does not come because Gandalf commands. He comes because his curiosity is aroused, because the fire and the noise attract his attention, and because the eagles are, by nature, watchers who investigate disturbances in their territory. The rescue is not a response to a summons. It is a response to an observation. The eagles see something happening in their domain. They investigate, and they decide with their own sovereign will to intervene. This detail is crucial. It establishes from the very first appearance of the eagles in Tolkien's published fiction that the eagles are independent agents who make their own decisions. They are not summoned. They are not controlled. They choose to help, and they choose based on their own assessment of the situation, their own judgment, their own understanding of what is happening and what ought to happen. The Lord of the Eagles tells Gandalf that the eagles do not love the goblins, and that they are willing to help Gandalf because Gandalf once healed the Lord of the Eagles of a wound. The favour is personal, a debt of honour between two individuals, not a contractual obligation between a wizard and a species. And the Lord of the Eagles is clear about the limits of his help. He will carry Gandalf and his companions away from the immediate danger, but he will not carry them to their destination. The eagles will take them part of the way, to a safe distance, to a place where they can continue their journey on foot, but no further. The limits are important. The eagles help, but they do not solve the problem. They remove the immediate threat, but they do not deliver the heroes to their goal. They provide a margin of survival, but they do not replace the need for the hero's own effort. The pattern of grace that supplements but does not replace mortal effort, is established here in The Hobbit, and it will repeat with increasing theological sophistication throughout The Lord of the Rings. Part 23. The Eagles and the Silmarils. The Eagles' involvement with the Silmarils, the holy jewels that are the central objects of the First Age, adds another dimension to our understanding of their nature and their role in the cosmic drama. Thorondor and his eagles rescued Beren and Elthian after their theft of a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown. The theft itself was the most audacious act of the First Age, the penetration of the most heavily guarded fortress in the world, the enchantment of Morgoth himself by Elthian's singing, the cutting of the Silmaril from the Iron Crown by Beren's hand, and the escape, the desperate, wounded, pursued flight from Angband, was made possible in its final stage by the intervention of the eagles, who found the heroes and carried them to safety. The Silmarils were sacred objects, jewels that contained the light of the two trees of Valinor, the most precious light in the history of the world. The theft of the Silmarils by Morgoth was the defining crime of the Elder Days. The quest to recover them was the driving force of the Silmarillion's narrative. And the eagles, Manu's agents, the servants of the King of the Valar, were directly involved in the recovery. This involvement is not incidental. It connects the eagles to the deepest stratum of Tolkien's mythology, to the cosmic drama of the Silmarils, to the struggle between light and darkness that defines the history of Arda, to the divine purpose that runs beneath the surface of all the stories. The eagles are not peripheral characters. They are central to the recovery of the light, central to the rescue of the heroes who dared to challenge the darkness, central to the unfolding of the plan that Ilúvatar has woven into the fabric of the world. When the eagles appear at Mount Doom, carrying Frodo and Sam away from the destruction of the ring, they are continuing the work that began when Thorondor carried Beren and Elthian away from Angband. The mission is the same: the rescue of beings who have dared to challenge the darkness, who have carried sacred objects into the heart of enemy territory, who have given everything they have in service of the light. The eagles are the continuity, the thread that connects the First Age to the Third, the Silmarils to the Ring, the dawn of the world to its twilight. Part 24. The Eagles and the Fall of Gondolin. The fall of Gondolin, the destruction of the greatest hidden elven city of the First Age, is one of the most tragic events in the legendarium, and the eagles' role in it reveals something important about the limits of their power and the nature of their mission. Gondolin was hidden. It was the most secret city in Middle-earth, a city built in a hidden valley in the mountains, protected by the encircling mountains, invisible to Morgoth spies, maintained in secrecy for centuries. And the eagles of the Crisagrim, Thorondor and his kindred, were part of Gondolin's defense system. They patrolled the skies above the mountains, they watched the approaches, they served as the aerial component of the city's security. And Gondolin fell. Despite the eagles' vigilance, despite the mountains, despite the secrecy, Gondolin was betrayed from within by Maeglin, the nephew of the king, who revealed the city's location to Morgoth. And Morgoth's armies came, armies of orcs and trolls and balrogs, led by Gothmog, the lord of the balrogs, and the city was destroyed. The eagles could not save Gondolin. They fought, they engaged the balrogs in aerial combat, they defended the escape routes, they enabled the survival of a remnant of the city's population. But they could not prevent the destruction. They could not overcome the overwhelming force that Morgoth brought against the city. They could provide the margin of survival, the escape route, the aerial cover, the protection that allowed the refugees to flee, but they could not replace the need for the walls and the warriors and the secrecy that had been the city's true defense. This is the pattern. The eagles help, but they do not save. They provide the margin, but they do not change the equation. They can carry you to safety after the disaster, but they cannot prevent the disaster from happening. They are the ambulance, not the army. They are the rescue, not the defense. They are the grace that arrives after the fall, not the wall that prevents it. Gondolin fell because it was betrayed. No amount of eagle power could have prevented the betrayal. The eagles are powerful against external threats, against armies, against dragons, against the physical forces of darkness. They are powerless against internal threats, against treachery, against corruption, against the moral failures that open the door to destruction from within. The eagles cannot protect you from yourself. They can only come for you after you have fallen. Part 25. The Eagles and Mortality. The eagles' relationship with mortality, with the mortal beings whom they rescue and serve, reveals a dimension of their character that is easily overlooked. The eagles are compassionate. They care. This is not a given. The eagles are divine agents, beings of enormous power, operating on a cosmic scale, serving purposes that are larger than any individual mortal life. They could be coldly functional, executing their missions with the precision of instruments, indifferent to the suffering of the beings they interact with, concerned only with the strategic outcome and not with the emotional reality of the beings involved. But they are not cold. They are warm. They are kind. When Gwaihir carries Gandalf from Orthanc, The dialogue between them is not the dialogue of a tool and its user. It is the dialogue of friends, beings who care about each other, who are concerned for each other's welfare, who understand each other's burdens, and who offer help not merely as a duty, but as an expression of genuine concern. When the eagles carry Frodo and Sam from Mount Doom, the rescue is not merely practical. It is gentle. Sam passes out from relief, and the eagles carry the hobbits carefully, tenderly, with the care that you would show to beings who have been through an ordeal beyond imagining, and who are fragile and exhausted and desperately in need of gentleness. This compassion is important because it tells us something about the nature of the divine in Tolkien's world. The divine is not cold. The divine is not indifferent. The divine cares about individual beings, cares about individual suffering, cares enough to send its agents not merely to accomplish a strategic objective, but to comfort the beings who have been broken by the cost of achieving it. The eagles are the proof that the gods of Middle-earth are not distant, uncaring overlords. They are the proof that Mando, the king of the Valar, the being who sits at the pinnacle of the cosmic hierarchy, is watching, is paying attention, is moved by the suffering of the mortal beings who inhabit his world. The eagles are Mandw's compassion made physical, the divine tenderness given wings and talons, and the ability to reach into the darkest places of the world and carry the wounded and the faithful to safety. Part 26. What the eagles see. Consider the eagle's perspective. Consider what the world looks like from the heights, from the peak of the misty mountains, from the altitude where the eagles fly, from the vantage point of beings who see the world not as a surface to be walked across, but as a pattern to be observed from above. The eagles see geography. They see the rivers and the mountains and the forests and the plains, the vast interconnected landscape of Middle-earth laid out below them like a map. They see the movements of armies. They see the migrations of peoples. They see the smoke of burning cities and the flash of battle and the slow grinding movements of the great forces that shape the history of the world. But they also see the small things. They see Gandalf, trapped on the pinnacle of Orthanc, a single grey-robed figure, tiny against the black stone of the tower, invisible to any observer who did not have the far sight of an eagle. They see two hobbits, collapsed on the slopes of Mount Doom, two tiny figures, barely visible against the ash and the lava, lost in the immensity of the volcanic landscape. The eagles see both scales, the cosmic and the individual, the vast movements of history and the tiny, desperate struggles of mortal beings. And they respond to both. They fight at the Black Gate, engaging the Nazgul in aerial combat on the stage of history's greatest battle. And they carry two hobbits to safety, handling them with the tenderness of beings who understand that the small figures in their talons are the most important individuals in the world. This dual vision, the ability to see both the cosmic and the individual, to operate on both the strategic and the personal level, is the defining characteristic of the eagles as characters. They are not merely large, they are perceptive. They see more than other beings see, not just farther, but deeper. They see the patterns that mortals miss. They see the significance that mortals overlook. They see the hobbits on the mountain, and they understand in a way that Sauron, with all his power and all his intelligence, cannot understand, that the small figures are the key to everything. Part 27. The Eagles and the Dwarves. The eagle's relationship with the dwarves is complex and, at times, contentious, and it reveals something about the eagle's character that complicates the simple picture of benevolent divine agents. The eagles of the misty mountains preyed on the dwarves' livestock. This is stated in The Hobbit. The Lord of the Eagles acknowledges that the eagles have hunted the sheep and goats that the dwarves tended in the mountain pastures, and that this has created friction between the two peoples. The eagles do not apologize for this. They are predators. They hunt. They take what they need from the landscape that they share with the dwarves, and they do not regard the dwarves' property claims as superseding their own hunting rights. This is a surprisingly mundane detail for beings of divine nature, and it is revealing precisely because of its mundanity. The eagles are not above the physical world. They are in it. They eat. They hunt. They have territorial instincts. They have relationships with their neighbors that are defined not by cosmic purpose, but by the ordinary, ground-level realities of shared space and competing needs. The eagles are not saints. They are not perfect. They are not the embodiment of unblemished divine goodness. They are complex beings, beings who serve the divine purpose, but who also have their own needs, their own instincts, their own relationships with the physical world. They serve Mando, but they also eat sheep. They rescue heroes, but they also irritate dwarves. They are instruments of grace, but they are also predators, beings of the natural world as well as the supernatural, physical creatures as well as spiritual ones. This complexity makes the eagles more interesting and more credible than they would be if they were simply angelic instruments of unambiguous good. The eagles have edges. They have appetites. They have the kind of grounded, physical reality that makes them feel like real beings rather than theological abstractions. They are divine agents who eat mutton. And the mutton eating does not diminish their divinity. It enriches it, adding the dimension of physical reality, of embodied existence, of the messy, complicated, not always comfortable experience of being a spiritual being in a material world. Part 28. The Eagle and the Hobbit. There is a specific moment in The Hobbit that deserves close attention. The moment when Bilbo wakes up on the back of an eagle and looks down at the world below. It is a small moment, easily overlooked, but it captures something essential about the experience of being carried by a divine being. Bilbo is terrified. He has been carried away from the burning trees, snatched from the jaws of the wargs, lifted into the sky by a being of enormous power, and he is dangling from the eagle's talons, looking down at a landscape that is miles below him, feeling the wind and the altitude and the sheer, vertiginous unreality of the experience. Bilbo is not a hero in this moment. He is a frightened hobbit. He is out of his depth, out of his element, out of his world. He belongs on the ground, in a hole, in a kitchen, in a place where the ceiling is low and the fire is warm and the world makes sense. He does not belong in the sky. He does not belong in the talons of a divine being, carried through the upper air at speeds that his hobbit brain cannot process. And yet he is there. And the view is extraordinary. For the first time in his life, Bilbo sees the world from above, sees the rivers and the forests and the mountains and the vast rolling landscape of Middle-earth spread out below him like a map. He sees the world as the eagles see it, from the perspective of the gods, from the vantage point of beings who inhabit the sky and who look down on the mortal world with eyes that encompass a scope that no ground-dwelling creature can imagine. This moment is, I think, one of Tolkien's quiet masterstrokes. The hobbit in the sky, the small, frightened, ordinary creature, carried to an extraordinary height by a power he does not understand, seeing the world from a perspective that was never meant for him, and being changed by the seeing. Bilbo returns to the ground. He continues his journey. But he has seen the world from above. He has been, for a brief and terrifying and exhilarating moment, lifted out of his own perspective and shown the larger picture. And the seeing changes him, not dramatically, not immediately, but subtly, gradually, in the way that all encounters with the divine change the beings who experience them. Part 29. The shape of the story. The eagles appear at the turning points of the story, not at random, not at convenience, but at the specific moments when the narrative shifts from darkness to light, from despair to hope, from the descending action of the catastrophe to the ascending action of the eucatastrophe. Map the eagle appearances across the whole of Tolkien's work, and a pattern emerges. In the First Age, the eagles appear at the rescue of Maedhros, the rescue of Fingolfin's body, the rescue of Beren and Elthian, the fall of Gondolin, the War of Wrath. Each appearance marks a turning point, a moment when the story pivots from one trajectory to another, when the darkness is interrupted by a flash of light, when the descending curve of tragedy is momentarily reversed by a moment of grace. In The Hobbit, the eagles appear at the rescue from the trees and at the Battle of Five Armies. Each appearance marks a turning point, from imminent death to unexpected survival, from certain defeat to last-minute victory. In The Lord of the Rings, the eagles appear at the rescue from Orthanc, the recovery from Xiraxagil, the Black Gate, and Mount Doom. Each appearance marks a turning point, from imprisonment to freedom, from death to resurrection, from defeat to survival, from sacrifice to salvation. The eagles are the structural markers of the eucatastrophe. They are the narrative indicators that the turn is happening, that the darkness is not permanent, that the story is not ending in despair. When the eagles appear, the audience knows instinctively, before the rescue is complete, that the worst is over. The eagles are the dawn. They are the signal that the night is ending. Part 30. The Eagles and Morgoth's Dragons. The relationship between the eagles and the dragons is one of the great untold rivalries of Tolkien's legendarium, and understanding it helps us appreciate the martial dimension of the eagle's nature. The eagles and the dragons are, in a sense, counterparts. Both are aerial beings of enormous power. Both serve cosmic masters. The eagles serve Manw, the dragons served Morgoth. Both play roles in the great battles of the Elder Days, and both represent, in their respective ways, the aerial dimension of the cosmic struggle between good and evil. But the counterpart is not an equal. The dragons, at least the greatest of them, and Calagon the Black, were created by Morgoth specifically to counter the eagles, to challenge Manw's dominion of the sky, to break the aerial superiority that the eagles had maintained since the beginning of the wars. And Calagon was Morgoth's response to Thorondor, a creature of darkness designed to match and surpass the greatest creature of light. The aerial battle at the end of the War of Wrath, the battle between Erendil and the eagles on one side and Ancalagon and the dragons on the other, was the first and the last great air war in the history of Middle-earth. It was fought over the ruins of Beleriand, in the skies above a landscape that was already being torn apart by the clash of divine powers, and its outcome, the death of Ancalagon, the defeat of the dragons, the final victory of the host of the West, was the decisive engagement that ended the First Age. The eagles won the air war. They defeated the dragons. They established the aerial supremacy of Manw's servants over the forces of darkness. And the victory was permanent. The winged dragons of the later ages Slog, and any others who survived into the Third Age, were lesser creatures, descendants of the great dragons of the First Age, diminished in the same way that Gwaihir was diminished compared to Thorondor. The eagle's victory in the War of Wrath ensured that the sky would never again be contested by the forces of evil at the scale of the First Age. By the Third Age, the aerial rivalry was effectively over. Sauron had no dragons, no winged fire-breathing beasts that could challenge the eagles in the sky. He had the fell beasts of the Nazgul, but these were lesser creatures, powerful against mortal beings, but not in the same category as the great dragons of the Elder Days. The eagle's aerial superiority in the Third Age was essentially uncontested, which is one of the reasons their appearance at the Black Gate is so decisive. The eagles can engage the Nazgul with confidence, because the Nazgul's fell beasts are not dragons and do not represent the kind of existential threat that the eagles faced in the First Age. Part 31. The Nesting Places. The eagle's choice of nesting places, always in the highest, most inaccessible peaks of the mountain ranges, tells us something about their nature that extends beyond habitat preference. High places in Tolkien's mythology are sacred. The Valar dwell on Tanakatiel, the highest mountain in the Blessed Realm. Man sits on the peak of the mountain, looking out over the world. The highest places are the places closest to the divine, the places where the air is thinnest and the sky is nearest and the connection between the physical world and the spiritual world is strongest. The eagles nest in the high places, because the high places are their natural habitat in a spiritual as well as a physical sense. They are beings of the upper air, beings whose nature draws them upward, toward the sky, toward the domain of Madebu, toward the heights where the world of the divine and the world of the mortal are closest together. The eagles do not merely live in the mountains. They inhabit the threshold between the mortal world and the divine, the liminal space where the earth ends and the sky begins. The Chrysogrim, the mountains above Gondolin where Thorondor nested, were described as the most inaccessible peaks in Beleriand. No one could reach the eagle's eyries without the eagle's permission. The peaks were so high, so steep, so battered by wind and weather that no ground-dwelling being could climb to them. The eagle's home was, by design, unreachable, a place apart, a sanctuary within a sanctuary, protected not by walls or gates, but by the sheer, implacable geography of altitude. This inaccessibility was part of the eagle's nature. You could not visit the eagles. You could not petition them. You could not show up at their door with a request or a complaint. You could only call from below, from the ground, from the mortal world, and hope that the call was heard, and that the response was favorable. The eagle's home was the physical expression of their theological position, above, separate, reachable only by grace. And yet the eagles descended. This is the miracle. These beings of the heights, these inhabitants of the threshold between mortal and divine, these beings came down. They descended from the heights. They entered the mortal world. They carried hobbits and wizards and elven lords in their talons, bringing the authority of the heights to the crises of the lowlands, bridging the gap between the unreachable and the reaching. Every eagle rescue is a descent, a voluntary lowering, a moment when the being of the heights chooses to enter the world of the lowlands and to carry its inhabitants to safety. The eagles do not merely fly, they descend. They come down from the places where no mortal can go, and they lift the mortal to the places where the mortal could never reach alone. Part 32. The Eagles and Beorn. The alliance between the eagles and Beorn, the skin changer, the great bear man of the Anduin Vales, at the Battle of Five Armies, reveals the specific kind of ally that the eagles preferred. Beorn arrived at the battle in the form of a great bear, breaking through the goblin lines, smashing through the formations, creating the ground-level chaos that complemented the eagles' aerial assault. The eagles attacked from above. Beorn attacked from below. The combination was devastating. The goblins, caught between the sky and the earth, between the talons and the claws, were broken. The alliance between the eagles and Beorn is rooted in shared territory. Both inhabited the lands between the Misty Mountains and Mirkwood. Both were beings of the wild, beings whose power was rooted in the physical landscape, in the mountains and the forests and the untamed places that existed outside the boundaries of settled civilization. The eagles and Beorn were allies of the natural world, beings who opposed the forces of corruption that threatened the wild places, who fought not for political causes but for the preservation of the world as it was made. The eagles' alliance with Beorn tells us that the eagles were not isolated. They had relationships with the other beings of the wild, relationships built on shared territory, shared enemies, and a shared commitment to the defense of the natural world against the goblins and the wargs and the other forces that corrupted the mountains and the forests. The image of the eagles attacking from above while Beorn rampaged below is one of the most powerful images in The Hobbit, the sky and the earth combining against the forces of darkness, the divine and the natural working together, the wings and the claws united in defense of a world that both inhabited and both loved. Part 33. The Eagles as Witnesses. The eagles are, among other things, the historians of the sky, the beings who have seen more of the history of Middle-earth than any other single group, the witnesses who have observed the great events of every age from the unique vantage point of the upper air. Think about what the eagles have seen. They have seen the light of the two trees, reflected from the peaks of the mountains. They have seen the rise of Morgoth and the darkening of Valinor. They have seen the great battles of the First Age, the Dagor Bragollach, the Nenaeth Arno Ediad, the fall of Gondolin, the War of Wrath. They have seen the reshaping of the world, the sinking of Beleriand, the bending of the straight road, the removal of Valinor from the physical world. They have seen the rise and fall of Menor. They have seen the founding of Gondor and Arna. They have seen the last alliance. They have seen the long twilight of the Third Age, the slow, grinding, centuries-long struggle against Sauron's shadow. No other beings in Middle-earth, except the elves and perhaps the Ents, have this scope of historical witness. The eagles have been present, watching, observing, at virtually every major turning point in the history of the world. They are the eyes of history, the observers who have seen the full panorama of Arda's story from above, from the perspective of the sky, with the clarity and the distance that altitude provides. And unlike the elves, who are ground-dwelling beings whose perspective is shaped by their location and their involvement, the eagles see from above. They see the patterns. They see the movements. They see the ways in which individual events connect to form the larger tapestry of history. The eagle's perspective is, in a very literal sense, the bird's-eye view, the view from the heights, the view that reveals patterns invisible to those who are embedded in the landscape. This is part of what makes the eagles such effective agents of Man W. They do not merely carry messages or perform rescues. They observe. They report. They provide intelligence, the divine intelligence service, gathering information from the heights, monitoring the movements of armies and the machinations of dark lords, and the slow, quiet shifts of power that determine the course of history. Part 34. The Eagle's Cry. The eagles are coming. The cry echoes through Tolkien's work, at the Battle of Five Armies, at the Black Gate, at the moments when the tide turns and the darkness breaks and the sky fills with wings. It is one of the most recognizable lines in all of fantasy literature, and its emotional power is, I think, directly connected to the theological significance of what the eagles represent. The cry is not merely an announcement. It is a promise. It is the assurance, delivered at the moment of greatest despair, that help is on the way, that the heavens are not empty, that the divine is not indifferent, that the powers that govern the world have not abandoned the beings who struggle and suffer within it. The eagles are coming. It is the fantasy equivalent of the cavalry charge, the moment when the bugle sounds and the reinforcements appear over the hill and the battle, which seemed lost, is suddenly winnable again. But it is more than a military trope. It is a spiritual declaration, the assertion that the world is governed by a power that cares, that watches, that acts, and that will not let the darkness have the last word. The cry gains its power from accumulation. The first time you hear it, in The Hobbit at the Battle of Five Armies, it is exciting. The second time, at the Black Gate, it is profound. By the time the eagles appear at Mount Doom, the cry has become something more than a narrative device. It has become a motif, a recurring symbol of divine grace, a signal that the eucatastrophe is happening, a sound that carries the full weight of Tolkien's theology in 3 simple words. The eagles are coming. The heavens are not empty. The gods are watching. Grace is on its way. Part 35. The eagles after the ring. What happened to the eagles after the War of the Ring? Tolkien does not tell us in detail, but we can reconstruct the outlines from what we know about the eagles' nature and their relationship to the cosmic situation. The destruction of the One Ring changed everything, for the elves, for the wizards, for the rings of power, for the entire system of cosmic intervention that had defined the Third Age. The ring was gone. Sauron was overthrown. The mission of the Astari was complete. Gandalf departed across the sea. The elven rings lost their power. The Third Age ended, and the Fourth Age began, the Age of Men. The age in which the divine presence in Middle-earth would diminish and the mortal world would be increasingly governed by mortal agency. The eagles, as man's agents, would have been affected by this transition. Their primary mission, the watching, the monitoring, the intervention against the forces of Sauron, was complete. The enemy they had been watching for was destroyed. The cosmic emergency that had justified their continued presence and their continued intervention was over. Did the eagles depart? Did they follow Gandalf across the sea, returning to the blessed realm, to the domain of man where they belonged? Did they fade, the way the elves faded, their spiritual presence diminishing as the mortal world moved further from the divine? Or did they remain, diminished perhaps, less visible, less active, but still present, still watching from the heights, still maintaining the ancient vigil that had defined their existence since the creation of the world? Tolkien does not answer these questions directly, but the pattern of his world suggests an answer. The eagles, like the elves, would have faded. The Fourth Age is the Age of Men, the age in which the divine withdraws and the mortal assumes responsibility for its own affairs. The eagles, as divine agents, would have become less present, less active, less involved in the affairs of a world that was increasingly mortal and increasingly self-governing. The eagles may still be in the mountains, they may still be watching, but their role has changed, from active intervention to passive observation, from the hand of providence to the memory of providence, from the wings that carry the heroes to safety to the shadow of wings, glimpsed occasionally in the high peaks, remembered in the songs, fading into the background of a world that has moved on. Part 36. The theological architecture. Let me step back and describe the full theological architecture of the eagle's role in Tolkien's work, because the architecture is precise, and it is beautiful, and it deserves to be seen whole. At the top of the hierarchy is Ilúvatar, the creator, the one, the source of all being. Ilúvatar created the world. Ilúvatar set the cosmic plan in motion. Ilúvatar intervenes directly only at the moments of absolute extremity, the reshaping of the world, the return of Gandalf from death. Ilúvatar is the ultimate author of the story, and his interventions are rare because they are reserved for the moments when no lesser power can achieve the necessary result. Below Ilúvatar are the Valar, the angelic powers, the governors of the world, the beings who shaped the physical reality of Middle-earth and who maintain its operations. Manwë is the king of the Valar, the lord of the air, the being whose domain is the sky and whose vision encompasses the world. The Valar do not intervene directly in the Third Age. They have learned from the catastrophe of the War of Wrath that their full power is too destructive for the mortal world. Instead, they send agents. The agents are two kinds, the Astari and the Eagles. The Astari are Maya in human form, Gandalf, Saruman, Radagast, sent to inspire and to guide, constrained from using their full power, operating through counsel and encouragement rather than through force. The Eagles are Maya, or Maya-adjacent being, in eagle form, sent to watch and to intervene, constrained from replacing the mortal struggle, operating through rescue and grace rather than through conquest. The mortal actors, Frodo, Sam, Aragorn, the hobbits, the men, the elves, the dwarves, are the agents of the struggle. They do the fighting. They do the suffering. They do the sacrificing. They are the beings whose choices and whose courage determine the outcome of the cosmic contest. Not because they are the most powerful, they are not, but because the cosmic design requires that the victory be won by the free choices of mortal beings, not by the overwhelming force of divine agents. The Eagles are the connection between the divine and the mortal, the thread that links the cosmic purpose to the ground-level reality, the mechanism by which grace is delivered to the actors who have earned it through their faithfulness. The Eagles do not fight the war. They attend the war. They watch. They wait. And at the moment when grace is needed, when the mortal actors have done everything they can and it is not enough, the Eagles descend. The thread tightens. The divine touches the mortal. And the world is saved, not by divine power but by divine grace, delivered through the wings of beings who serve the King of Heaven. Part 37. The Eagles and Freedom. There is a dimension of the Eagle's story that connects to the central theme of The Lord of the Rings, the theme of freedom, and that deepens our understanding of why the Eagles behave the way they do. The Lord of the Rings is, at its core, a story about freedom, about the struggle between the free will of mortal beings and the dominating will of Sauron, between the right of each creature to choose its own path and the dark ambition to control all creatures and to bend all wills to a single purpose. The ring is the instrument of domination. Its destruction is the restoration of freedom. The entire narrative is organized around this central opposition: freedom versus control, choice versus domination, the many versus the one. The Eagles embody freedom. They are the freest beings in Middle-earth, beings who cannot be controlled, who cannot be commanded, who cannot be incorporated into anyone's strategy or anyone's plan. They serve Manwë, but they serve freely, not as slaves but as willing servants, not as tools but as collaborators. Their service is the expression of their own will, their own choice, their own understanding of what is right and what is needed. And the Eagles preserve freedom in others. This is the deepest purpose of their interventions. Not merely to rescue individuals or to turn the tide of battles, but to preserve the conditions in which free choice can operate. The Eagles rescue Gandalf from Orthanc so that Gandalf can continue to inspire free resistance. They fight at the Black Gate so that the free peoples can continue to fight. They carry Frodo and Sam from Mount Doom so that the free beings who saved the world can survive to enjoy the freedom they won. The Eagles never dominate. They never impose. They never use their enormous power to force an outcome that the mortal actors have not chosen for themselves. They supplement. They support. They provide the margin that allows free choice to succeed. But they do not replace free choice. They do not make decisions for the mortals. They do not take over the struggle and run it according to their own agenda. They are, in the deepest sense, the servants of freedom, beings whose power is placed at the service of the free will of others, never used to override it. This is the answer to the eagle question that goes beyond theology and beyond practicality. The eagles cannot fly the ring to Mordor because doing so would undermine the freedom that the entire story is about. The destruction of the ring must be a free act, a choice made by a free being, a mortal being. A being who has the option of using the ring and who chooses instead to destroy it. The eagles cannot make this choice for the hobbits. They cannot carry the ring and make the decision. The decision must be Frodo's, free, unchosen, morally significant. And the eagles who serve freedom cannot and will not usurp it. Part 38. The metaphor of wings. Wings are, in every mythology, the symbol of the divine, the marker of the spiritual, the indicator of the transcendent. Angels have wings, Valkyries have wings. The gods of Egypt and Mesopotamia and Greece are depicted with wings. The wing is the universal symbol of the connection between the earthly and the heavenly, between the mortal and the divine, between the ground where we live and the sky where the gods dwell. Tolkien's eagles are part of this tradition. They are the winged agents of the divine, the physical embodiment of the connection between Mandw's throne on Tanaketil and the mortal world of Middle-earth. Their wings are not merely a means of locomotion. They are a symbol, a sign, visible to all who see them, that the heavens are not empty, and that the power that governs the world is not indifferent to the struggles of the beings who inhabit it. When the eagles appear over the battlefield, when their wings block the sun and their shadows sweep across the ground and their cry fills the air, the effect is not merely military, it is spiritual. The sight of the eagles changes the mood of the battle. It lifts the hearts of the defenders, it breaks the morale of the attackers. The eagle's appearance is, in the language of myth, a theophany, a manifestation of the divine, a moment when the invisible becomes visible, when the transcendent enters the physical world and makes its presence known. The wings carry meaning. The eagle's wingspan, enormous, shadow-casting, visible from miles away, is a statement. Here is something greater than you. Here is something that operates on a scale that your mortal mind cannot fully comprehend. Here is a being that inhabits the space between the earth and the stars, that bridges the gap between your world and the world of the gods, that carries in its feathers the authority of the King of the Valar. Part 39. The Eagles and the Nazgul. The confrontation between the Eagles and the Nazgul at the Black Gate deserves closer examination, because it is the most direct clash between the agents of the Valar and the agents of Sauron in the entire War of the Ring. And the dynamics of the confrontation tell us something important about the relative power of these beings. The Nazgul are wraiths, the 9 mortal kings who were consumed by Sauron's rings, transformed from men into spirits of terror, bound to Sauron's will and sustained by his power. They are mounted on fell beasts, great winged creatures, ancient and terrible, bred or captured for aerial warfare. The Nazgul on their fell beasts are, in conventional terms, the most powerful aerial combat force that Sauron possesses, and the Eagles beat them. At the Black Gate, the Eagles engage the Nazgul in aerial combat and fight them to a standstill, keeping the wraiths occupied, preventing them from interfering with the ground battle, neutralizing Sauron's most terrifying assets during the critical minutes when the ring is being carried to the fire. The Eagles' ability to contend with the Nazgul is, I think, proof of their divine nature. The Nazgul are not merely powerful warriors. They are supernatural beings, wraiths, spirits, beings whose power operates in the spiritual realm as well as the physical. An ordinary creature, even an enormously powerful ordinary creature, would be overwhelmed by the Nazgul's terror aura, the supernatural dread that breaks the will of mortal beings. The eagles are not broken. They engage the Nazgul without flinching, without being paralyzed by the wraith's terror, without the fear that would incapacitate any being whose nature was purely physical. This resistance to the Nazgul's terror is the marker of spiritual power. Only beings with their own spiritual authority, their own connection to the divine, their own source of supernatural strength, can resist the Nazgul's dread. Gandalf resists because he is a Maya. Aragorn resists because he is a Nadan of exceptional will and lineage. The eagles resist because they are Man W's servants, beings whose spiritual nature places them in the same category as the Nazgul, on the other side of the cosmic divide. The eagles are not afraid of the Nazgul. This is, in a world where the Nazgul can paralyze entire armies with their presence, an extraordinary statement. It tells us that the eagles operate at a level of spiritual authority that places them beyond the reach of Sauron's terror, that they inhabit a plane of existence where the Nazgul's power, however devastating to mortal beings, is matched and countered by a power of equal or greater magnitude. Part 40. The Eagles and Radagast. The connection between the Eagles and Radagast, the brown wizard, the Astari who was most closely associated with the natural world, is a thread in the story that reveals something about the network of divine agents operating in Middle-earth. Radagast is the wizard who facilitates the rescue from Orthanc. When Gandalf goes to Isengard seeking counsel from Saruman, he meets Radagast on the road and asks him to send word to the eagles that Gandalf needs their help. Radagast, unaware of Saruman's treachery, passes the message along, and Gwaihir comes to Orthanc and carries Gandalf to freedom. This chain of communication, Gandalf to Radagast to the eagles, reveals the structure of the divine agent network in Middle-earth. The Astari and the eagles are not operating in isolation. They are connected, part of the same system, serving the same master, coordinating their actions through channels of communication that allow them to respond to crises with a speed and a precision that no mortal organization could match. Radagast's role as the intermediary is particularly interesting. Radagast is the wizard who understands animals, who speaks their languages, who knows their ways, who has a relationship with the natural world that the other Astari do not share. Radagast is the natural bridge between the Astari, who operate primarily in the world of men and elves, and the eagles, who operate primarily in the natural world, in the mountains and the sky. His role as message carrier is not incidental. It is structural, the function of a being who exists at the intersection of two kinds of divine service and who can facilitate communication between them. The Radagast connection also tells us something about the resilience of the divine network. Saruman has been corrupted. The head of the Astari has turned traitor. The divine agent network has been compromised at its highest level, and yet the network still functions, because the network is not dependent on a single individual, however powerful. The eagles can be reached through Radagast, even though Saruman has betrayed the mission. The divine purpose can be served through alternative channels, even when the primary channel has been corrupted. The divine network is robust. It can absorb the loss of its leader and continue to function. It can root around corruption. It can find alternative paths to the same objective. And the eagles are one of those alternative paths, a channel of divine intervention that operates independently of the Astari, that can be activated when the wizard channel fails, that provides a backup, a redundancy, a second line of defense against the possibility that the primary agents might fail or fall. Part 41. The Eagles and Erebor. The Eagles' involvement with the Lonely Mountain, Erebor, the dwarven kingdom that is the destination of Bilbo's adventure in The Hobbit, reveals another dimension of their role as regional guardians and strategic actors. The Eagles had a territorial interest in the Lonely Mountain region. They nested in the mountains to the north. They hunted in the lands between the Misty Mountains and the Lonely Mountain. They had relationships, friendly, hostile, neutral, with the various peoples who inhabited the region. The dwarves of Erebor, the men of Dale, the wood elves of Thranduil's realm. When Smaug attacked the Lonely Mountain and drove the dwarves out, the Eagles did not intervene. This is significant. Smaug was a dragon, a creature of immense power, a fire-breathing, flying, treasure-hoarding monster that no single eagle could have defeated in combat. The Eagles' non-intervention against Smaug tells us something about their limitations. They are powerful, but they are not all-powerful. They can contend with Balrogs and Nazgul and goblin armies, but a dragon, particularly a great dragon, a fire drake of the north, is beyond their individual capability. But when the goblins attacked after Smaug's death, when the armies of the goblins and the wargs descended on the Lonely Mountain to seize the treasure, the Eagles intervened. They came to the Battle of Five Armies because the goblins were a threat they could handle, because the battle was a turning point that warranted divine intervention, because the cosmic situation demanded that the free peoples, dwarves, elves, men, not be destroyed by the forces of darkness at the moment of their potential unification. The Eagles' selective intervention, their decision to fight at the Battle of Five Armies but not against Smaug, reveals the calculus of divine grace. The Eagles do not intervene against every threat. They intervene against the threats that meet specific criteria, threats that the mortal actors cannot handle alone, threats that arrive at turning points in the cosmic narrative, threats whose outcomes will shape the course of history in ways that matter to the divine purpose. Smaug was a problem for the dwarves. The goblin army was a problem for the world. And the Eagles, as agents of the divine, respond to world problems rather than individual problems, to cosmic crises rather than local difficulties, to the moments that matter to the whole rather than the moments that matter only to the part. Part 42. The Eagles and the Concept of Providence. The Eagles are Tolkien's most visible expression of the concept of providence, the idea that the world is governed by a benevolent intelligence that guides events toward a good outcome, even when the path to that outcome passes through darkness and suffering. Providence, in Tolkien's conception, is not the same as predetermination. The world is not a machine running according to a preset program, with every event scripted and every outcome predetermined. The mortal actors have free will. Their choices matter. Their actions shape the course of events in ways that are genuinely open, genuinely unpredictable, genuinely dependent on the exercise of free moral agency. But beneath the freedom, beneath the genuinely open, genuinely contingent surface of events, there is a deeper current. A guiding intelligence, a purpose that operates not by controlling events, but by shaping the conditions in which events occur, by arranging the circumstances so that the right choice, freely made, will produce the right outcome. The Eagles are the visible face of this providence. They are the moments when the deeper current breaks through the surface, when the guiding intelligence makes itself visible, when the cosmic purpose manifests in the physical world as a great bird descending from the sky, carrying a wizard to freedom or a hobbit to safety. The Eagles do not control events. They do not determine outcomes. They do not override the free choices of the mortal actors. They operate within the space that free choice creates, the space between the mortal effort and the cosmic need, the gap between what the heroes can do and what needs to be done. The Eagles fill the gap. They provide the margin. They are the difference between what is possible through mortal effort alone and what is necessary for the cosmic purpose to be fulfilled. This is Tolkien's providence, not a God who controls everything, but a God who watches everything, who cares about everything, who intervenes not to control but to complete, who sends his agents not to replace mortal effort but to supplement it, who allows the free peoples to struggle and to suffer and to sacrifice, because the struggle and the suffering and the sacrifice are the conditions in which grace becomes meaningful. Without the struggle, the eagles are just birds. Without the sacrifice, the rescue is just logistics. Without the darkness, the dawn is just light. The eagles matter because they arrive in the context of genuine suffering, in the context of mortal effort that has reached its limit, in the context of sacrifice that has been made freely and fully, in the context of a darkness that is real and that might, without the intervention, prevail. Part 43. Why Tolkien loved the eagles. Tolkien loved the eagles. This is evident from the frequency and the emotional weight of their appearances, from the way he deploys them, always at the moments of greatest dramatic intensity, always with the maximum emotional impact, always with the precision of a storyteller who understands exactly how to use this specific tool for maximum effect. The eagles are Tolkien's favorite narrative device. This is a bold claim, but I think the evidence supports it. No other element in Tolkien's fiction is deployed with such consistency, such emotional precision, such structural elegance. The eagles appear at exactly the right moment, every time. They are never premature before the crisis has developed, and never late after the crisis has resolved. They are perfectly timed, which suggests that Tolkien, who was famously meticulous about the details of his fiction, spent considerable thought on the exact placement of each eagle appearance. And the eagles are connected to Tolkien's most personal beliefs. Tolkien was a devout Catholic. He believed in grace. He believed in divine intervention. He believed that the world is governed by a power that is greater than the forces of darkness, and that this power intervenes, not always, not predictably, not in ways that can be calculated or expected, but genuinely, really, at the moments of greatest need. The eagles are Tolkien's expression of this belief, his literary translation of the theological concept of grace into the language of myth and fantasy. Every time the eagles appear, Tolkien is saying, "I believe that grace is real. I believe that the world is not abandoned. I believe that at the darkest moment, when all hope seems lost, something will happen. Something unexpected. Something unearned. Something that comes from outside the story and that transforms the ending from despair to joy." The eagles are Tolkien's faith, given wings. Part 44. The weight of wings. I want to hold this image, the weight of wings. The physical, tangible, felt reality of what it means to be carried by an eagle. Sam Gamgee is lying on the slopes of Mount Doom. He is exhausted. He is dehydrated. He is burned and battered and half poisoned by the fumes of the volcano. He has carried Frodo up the mountain. He has watched Frodo claim the ring. He has watched Gollum bite the ring from Frodo's finger and fall into the fire. He has watched the mountain erupt, and the land shake and the world come apart around him. And he is dying. He knows it. He is lying on the rock, next to Frodo, and they are both dying, and there is no way down and no way out, and the lava is coming, and the world is ending, not in the abstract, not in the distant sense of a war being lost, but here, now, physically, the rock under their bodies growing hot, and the air filling with ash, and the sky turning black. And Sam looks up, and he sees the eagles, the weight of that moment. The sheer, overwhelming, heart-breaking relief of that moment. The moment when the hobbit, who has carried everything, who has endured everything, who has given everything he has and more than everything he has, looks up and sees the wings. The wings are real. They are physical. They cast shadows. They move the air. The eagles descend, great, ancient, powerful beings, carrying the authority of the King of Heaven in their feathers, and they take the hobbits in their talons. Gently, carefully, with the infinite care of beings who understand the value of the small lives they are carrying. And Sam feels the weight lift. Not just his physical weight, the spiritual weight, the emotional weight, the crushing, suffocating, world-on-your-shoulders weight that he has been carrying since the Shire. The eagles take the weight. They carry it. They lift Sam into the sky, and the sky is clear, and the air is clean, and the world that Sam thought he would never see again, the world of green fields and running water and sunshine, the world is still there. Still beautiful, still worth saving, the weight of wings, the feeling of being carried by something greater than yourself, the experience of grace, physical, tangible, felt in the body, experienced in the bones, as real as the rock you were lying on a moment ago, and as miraculous as the sky you are flying through now. This is what the eagles are. This is what they have always been. Not a plot device, not a convenient rescue, not a logical problem to be solved with military strategy and flight path analysis. The eagles are the feeling of being lifted, the experience of being carried by a power that is greater than your own, the relief of knowing that you are not alone, that you have not been abandoned, that the world is governed by something that cares about a hobbit lying on a rock. Part 45. The misunderstanding. The fly the eagles to Mordor argument is, at its core, a misunderstanding, and the misunderstanding tells us something about the difference between the way modern audiences approach fantasy and the way Tolkien wrote it. Modern audiences approach fantasy as a problem-solving exercise. The quest is a problem. The ring is an obstacle. The question is, what is the most efficient solution? And the most efficient solution, from a purely logistical perspective, is obvious. Fly. Bypass the ground-level obstacles. Skip the walking and the fighting and the suffering. Use the most powerful available asset, the eagles, to deliver the ring to its destination with maximum speed and minimum risk. This approach treats the story as a puzzle, as a problem to be optimized, a system to be hacked, a challenge to be solved with the minimum expenditure of resources. And within this framework, the eagles are a solution that the characters inexplicably fail to use, and the story is a puzzle with a glaring, obvious, frustrating flaw. But Tolkien was not writing a puzzle. He was writing a myth. He was writing a story about the nature of good and evil, about the relationship between the divine and the mortal, about the meaning of sacrifice and the value of suffering and the specific, irreplaceable, theologically essential role of free moral choice in the salvation of the world. In Tolkien's framework, efficiency is not the point. The journey is the point. The suffering is the point. The choice, the free, unchosen, morally significant choice to carry the ring and to destroy it, is the point. The eagles cannot carry the ring because carrying the ring is not a logistical problem. It is a moral problem. It is a question of will, of character, of the specific, individual, irreplaceable moral agency of the being who carries the weapon and who must choose, at the last moment, to give it up. The eagles cannot make this choice for Frodo. Nobody can. The choice must be Frodo's, free, unchosen, morally significant, carried in his body and his mind and his hobbit heart through the fires of Mordor and to the edge of the crack of doom. The journey is not an inefficiency to be optimized away. It is the mechanism by which the choice becomes possible. The crucible in which Frodo's will is tested and refined and, ultimately, overwhelmed, and in which the final, saving act of grace occurs because of the specific, journey-created conditions that only the walk could produce. You cannot fly to grace. You have to walk. Part 46. The Eagles and Tolkien's legacy. The Eagles have become, in the decades since Tolkien's death, one of the most debated elements of his fiction. And the debate, I think, reveals something about the legacy of The Lord of the Rings and the way it is read by audiences who may not share Tolkien's theological framework. The Fly the Eagles to Mordor argument is, in a sense, a secular critique of a religious text. It applies the logic of efficiency to a story that is written in the logic of grace. It asks, why didn't they do it faster? In response to a story that says speed is not the point. It treats the quest as a logistical challenge when the quest is, for Tolkien, a moral and spiritual journey. This does not mean that the argument is wrong. It means that the argument and the text are operating in different frameworks. The argument in the framework of modern, secular, efficiency-oriented thinking, the text in the framework of ancient, religious, grace-oriented thinking. The argument is asking a reasonable question within its own framework. But the answer lies in a different framework, the framework of myth, of theology, of the specific, deliberately non-modern understanding of the world that Tolkien was trying to express through his fiction. The Eagles are the test case. They are the element of the story that most clearly reveals the gap between Tolkien's intentions and the assumptions of his modern audience. If you read the Eagles as big birds, the plot hole is obvious. If you read the Eagles as divine agents, the plot hole disappears, replaced by a theological statement about the nature of grace and the limits of divine intervention, and the specific, irreplaceable role of mortal free choice in the salvation of the world. The Eagles are not a flaw in the story. They are the point of the story. They are the physical expression of the deepest belief that animates The Lord of the Rings, the belief that the world is not abandoned, that grace is real, that the divine cares about the mortal, and that the mortal, in turn, must do its own work, must make its own choices, must walk its own path to the fire. Because the path is the point, and the walking is the meaning, and the eagles, the beautiful, terrifying, divine, grace-carrying eagles, will be there at the end to catch you when you fall. The Fly the Eagles to Mordor question is not a problem to be solved. It is a misunderstanding to be corrected. A misunderstanding that reveals the difference between reading a story as a puzzle and reading a story as a myth. Puzzles have optimal solutions. Myths have meanings. And the Eagles are not a solution that was overlooked. They are a meaning that was missed. Part 47. The Eagles and Memory. In our own world, the world that Tolkien imagined as the descendant of Middle-earth, the world of the Fourth Age and beyond, the Eagles are remembered only in stories, only in myth, only in the vague, half-understood cultural memory of a time when the world was larger and the sky was fuller, and great wings cast shadows over battlefields where the fate of creation hung in the balance. We do not see the eagles. We do not hear their cry. We do not feel the wind of their passing or the shadow of their wings. The eagles have withdrawn, along with the elves, along with the dwarves, along with the magic and the enchantment, and the ancient, deep, mythic quality that defined Middle-earth in the earlier ages. But we remember them. We remember them in the stories we tell, in the myths we preserve, in the persistent, cross-cultural, seemingly universal human intuition that there is something in the sky, something watching, something caring, something that might, at the moment of greatest need, descend from the heights and carry us to safety. The eagles are the ancestor of every winged angel in every religion, every culture, every mythology. They are the archetype, the original, the template, the deep pattern from which all subsequent images of divine winged beings have been derived. When a medieval painter depicts an angel with wings, the painter is, in the framework of Tolkien's myth, remembering the eagles. Remembering, at some deep, unconscious, culturally transmitted level, the great winged beings of the elder days who served the King of Heaven and who intervened in the affairs of the mortal world when the moment demanded it. This is, of course, Tolkien's conceit rather than historical fact. But the conceit is powerful. The idea that the angels of our religions are faded memories of real beings, distorted by millennia of retelling, simplified by the limitations of mortal memory, but rooted in a genuine experience of the divine that occurred so long ago that we have forgotten everything except the wings. The wings endure. The memory of the wings endures. Long after the names are forgotten, Thorondor, Gwaihir, Landroval, Meneldor, long after the battles are reduced to legends and the legends are reduced to fairy tales, and the fairy tales are reduced to vague cultural impressions, the wings endure. The image of great wings in the sky, carrying salvation on their feathers, arriving at the moment of greatest need. This image persists across cultures, across centuries, across the vast gulf of time that separates our world from the world that Tolkien imagined. The eagles are still here. They are in every church ceiling, in every angel figurine, in every painting of winged beings descending from the clouds to carry the faithful to safety. They are the memory, the ancient, persistent, never quite forgotten memory of a time when the sky was full of grace. Part 48. The cry. Let me close with the cry that echoes through the ages, that sounds across the battlefield, that carries the full weight of Tolkien's theology in 3 words: the eagles are coming. It is a cry of hope, a cry of relief, a cry of the specific, overwhelming, body-shaking joy that comes when the worst seems certain, and the darkness seems final, and the world seems lost. And then, from a direction you did not expect, from a height you could not see, help arrives. The cry does not mean we are saved. Not exactly. The cry means we are not alone. It means the heavens are watching. It means the powers that govern the world have not abandoned us. It means, in the simplest and most profound sense, that grace is real, that the world is governed by something that cares, something that watches, something that sends its agents into the darkest places and the most desperate moments and the most impossible situations, not to solve the problem for us, but to be with us while we solve it ourselves. The eagles are coming. It is a cry that Tolkien heard, I think, in the trenches of the Somme, in the darkness and the mud and the death of the First World War, where the young lieutenant who would one day write The Lord of the Rings learned what it felt like to be in the darkness and to hope for the dawn. The eagles are Tolkien's dawn. They are his answer to the darkness. Not a denial of the darkness, not a pretense that the darkness does not exist, but a declaration that the darkness is not the whole story, that behind the darkness there is light, that above the battlefield there is sky, and that in the sky, if you look up, if you can find the strength to raise your eyes from the mud and the blood and the despair, in the sky there are wings. Part 49. The Eagle and the Moth. The movies changed the mechanism. In Peter Jackson's films, Gandalf communicates with the eagles through a moth, a small, grey moth that Gandalf whispers to on the balcony of Orthanc, that flies away into the night, that carries Gandalf's message to Gwaihir across the miles of darkness between Isengard and the mountains. This is not in the book. In the book, the message goes through Radagast, through the Brown Wizard, through the mortal channel of one Istar communicating with another. But Jackson's invention, the moth, has become so ingrained in the popular imagination that most people now associate the eagles with the moth rather than with Radagast. The moth is a beautiful cinematic invention, and I mention it not to criticize but to observe the contrast between the book's mechanism and the film's. In the book, the message goes through the divine agent network, through the system of Istari and eagles that Manyo has established for the governance of his agents in Middle-earth. In the film, the message goes through a tiny, fragile, insignificant creature. A moth, the humblest of all flying things, carrying the most important message in the world across the night sky. The film's invention, interestingly, captures something of Tolkien's own theology, the idea that the small and the humble are the carriers of grace, that the insignificant creatures are the ones who change the course of history, that the moth can carry the message that summons the eagle just as the hobbit can carry the ring that destroys the Dark Lord. Jackson's moth is, in a way, the aerial equivalent of Tolkien's hobbit, the small thing that makes the great thing possible, the humble creature that bridges the gap between the mortal need and the divine response. Part 50. The sound of wings. What did the eagles sound like? This is a question that the text answers indirectly, through description and implication, and that the imagination fills in from the raw materials that Tolkien provides. The eagles are enormous. A being with a wingspan of 30 fathoms, as Thorondor had, would produce a sound when it flew, when it beat its wings, when it displaced the volume of air that a wingspan of 180 feet would displace. The sound would be low, deep, rhythmic, more felt than heard. A vibration in the air that you would register in your chest before you heard it in your ears. The eagles also had voices. They spoke. They cried out in battle. They announced their arrival with calls that carried across miles of open air, audible over the din of combat, cutting through the noise of clashing weapons and screaming soldiers and the general roar of a battlefield in full fury. The sound of the eagles arriving at a battle would have been distinctive, a combination of the deep, rhythmic beat of enormous wings and the sharp, high, piercing cry of the eagles' voices. It would have been unmistakable. It would have been immediately recognizable to anyone who had heard it before, and it would have carried, in its specific combination of depth and pitch and rhythm, a meaning that went beyond sound, a meaning that said, the sky is no longer empty, the heights are no longer silent, the divine agents are here. Think about the soldiers at the Black Gate, surrounded, outnumbered, dying, hearing that sound. The beat of wings, the cry, the shadow passing overhead, enormous, casting its shape across the ground. The sudden, physical, felt knowledge that something has changed, that the sky is no longer just sky, that the air above the battlefield is now occupied by beings of immense power who are fighting on your side. The sound of wings at the Black Gate would have been one of the most extraordinary sounds in the history of Middle-earth. A sound that carried the weight of divine intervention, that announced the arrival of grace, that told every mortal soldier on the field that the heavens were not empty, and that the worst was over, and that the world, the whole, struggling, beautiful, almost lost world, was going to survive. Part 51. The Eagles and the Stars. Tolkien connects the eagles to the sky, and the sky connects to the stars, and the stars connect to Varda, the queen of the Valar, the lady of the stars, the being who kindled the lights that the elves first saw when they awoke, and who remains, in the memory and the devotion of the Eldar, the most beloved of all the Valar. Manw and Varda are inseparable. They rule together. They see together, man seeing the movements of the physical world from his throne on Tanakatiel, Varda seeing the spiritual condition of the world from the same vantage point. Together, they encompass the full range of divine perception, the physical and the spiritual, the seen and the unseen, the movements of armies and the condition of souls. The eagles serve both. They are Manw's agents, but they operate under Varda's starlight, flying beneath the stars that Varda kindled, navigating by the constellations that Varda arranged, sustained by the light that Varda placed in the sky as a sign of hope and a source of guidance for the beings who navigate the darkness below. When the eagles fly at night, when they cross the mountains in the darkness, when they search for the stranded and the lost, when they carry their missions through the hours when the sun is gone, they fly by Varda's stars. The stars are their map. The stars are their compass. The stars are the connection between the eagles and the highest feminine power in the cosmos, the Queen of the Valar, the Lady of the Stars, whose light sustains the world and whose love for the children of Ilúvatar, both elves and men, is the emotional foundation of the Valar's engagement with Middle-earth. This connection, the eagles to Manw to Varda to the stars, places the eagles in the center of the cosmic hierarchy. They are not peripheral agents operating at the margins of the divine. They are central, part of the core apparatus of the Valar's governance, connected to the highest powers, operating under the authority of the King and Queen of Heaven, sustained by the light that is older than the sun and that will endure when the sun has dimmed. Part 52. The eagles nobody mentions. There are eagle appearances in Tolkien's work that most fans overlook, moments that are less dramatic than the great rescues, but that contribute to our understanding of the eagle's role and nature. The eagles served as messengers. In the First Age, Thorondor's eagles carried intelligence between the elven kingdoms, reports of troop movements, warnings of impending attacks, communications that crossed the mountain barriers that separated the elven realms. This messenger function is unglamorous but essential, part of the eagle's role as Manw's eyes and ears. The watching and the reporting that made up the bulk of their daily activity, in contrast to the dramatic rescues that dominate the stories. The eagles served as sentinels. The Chrysagreme, the mountains above Gondolin, were patrolled by eagles who watched for any sign of Morgoth's spies or scouts. This sentinel function was continuous, year-round, the eagle equivalent of a standing patrol, boring, repetitive, essential work that received no glory and no song, but that maintained the security that allowed Gondolin to exist for centuries. The eagles served as escorts. When Fingon reached Thangorodrim and found Maedhros hanging beyond his reach, Thorondor bore him up to the cliff face, providing the aerial mobility that made the rescue possible. This escort function was tactical, the eagle serving as a platform, a means of reaching places that were inaccessible by ground. These less dramatic functions, messaging, sentinel work, escort duty, reveal the eagles as working beings, not merely heroic ones. The eagle's daily existence was not a series of dramatic rescues interrupted by periods of rest. It was a sustained, ongoing, centuries-long campaign of watching, reporting, patrolling, and communicating, the invisible infrastructure of divine surveillance that maintained the Valar's awareness of events in Middle-earth, and that created the conditions in which the dramatic rescues could be executed effectively. Part 53. The Eagle-Shaped Hole. Consider the world without the eagles. Consider what Middle-earth would have looked like if Manw had not sent his agents, if the sky had been empty, if the great winged beings had never descended from the heights to intervene in the affairs of the mortal world. Without the eagles, Fingolfin's body would have been devoured by wolves. The most heroic act of the First Age, the single combat between the High King of the Noldor and the Dark Lord himself, would have ended not in dignity, but in desecration. Without the eagles, Beren and Elthian would have died. The greatest love story in the legendarium, the tale that inspired the relationship between Aragorn and Arwen, would have ended on the slopes of Thangorodrim, and the Silmaril would never have been recovered. Without the eagles, Gondolin's refugees would have been slaughtered. Erendil would not have survived. The Valar would not have been summoned to the War of Wrath. Morgoth might never have been overthrown. Without the eagles, Gandalf would have died on Orthanc. The Fellowship would not have been formed. The quest would not have been launched. The ring would not have been destroyed. Without the eagles, the Battle of Five Armies would have been lost. The goblins would have taken Erebor. The northern alliance between dwarves, elves, and men would not have been formed, and the defense of the north during the War of the Ring would have been fatally weakened. Without the eagles, the Black Gate battle would have been lost more quickly. The Nazgul would have destroyed Aragorn's army before the ring could be destroyed. The timing, the razor-thin margin between the army's destruction and the ring's destruction, would not have held. Without the eagles, Frodo and Sam would have died on Mount Doom. The heroes who saved the world would have perished in the world they saved, and the victory would have been hollow. A world saved, but at the cost of the beings who made the saving possible. The eagle-shaped hole is enormous. Remove the eagles from the story, and the story collapses, not in every detail, not in every scene, but at the critical junctures, at the turning points, at the moments that determine whether the narrative trends toward salvation or toward disaster. The eagles are the hinges. Remove the hinges, and the doors do not swing, and the story ends in darkness. Part 54. What the eagles really are. So what are the great eagles, really? Let me state it plainly, having spent the evening exploring the question from every angle. The great eagles are the conscience of the sky. They are the divine presence made physical, the proof, visible to every being who looks up, that the world is not governed by chance or by the brute force of the strongest will. They are the agents of man, the king of the Valar, the being who sits at the pinnacle of the cosmic hierarchy and who watches the world with eyes that see further and deeper than any mortal perception. The eagles are grace. They are the unearned, undeserved, unschedulable intervention of the divine in the affairs of the mortal, the sudden, joyous, heart-breaking turn that transforms the darkest moment into the brightest, that carries the hobbit from the fire and the wizard from the tower and the world from the edge of ruin. The eagles are freedom. They are the embodiment of the free will that stands opposed to the dominating will of Sauron and the Ring. Beings who serve the divine not because they are compelled, but because they choose. Who intervene not because they are commanded, but because they judge that intervention is warranted. Who remain sovereign in their own choices while placing their sovereignty at the service of the cosmic good. The eagles are beauty. They are the most magnificent beings in the sky of Middle-earth, vast, ancient, powerful, glorious, carrying in their wingbeats the rhythm of the wind, and in their cries the authority of the heavens. The sight of an eagle, the shadow of great wings, the flash of golden eyes, the tremendous, breathtaking spectacle of a being the size of a small building banking in the upper air, is one of the supreme aesthetic experiences of Middle-earth. The eagles are hope. This is their final, most important identity. They are the answer to the question that every being in the darkness asks: is anyone watching? Is anyone listening? Does anyone care? The eagles answer yes. The sky is not empty. The heights are not silent. The world is governed by a power that sees, that cares, that sends its agents into the darkest places, that will not let the darkness have the last word. The eagles are not a plot hole. They are the answer to the plot, the resolution that Tolkien was building toward from the very first page. The grace that makes the story not merely a tale of heroism, but a tale of salvation. The wings that carry the meaning of the entire Lord of the Rings on their enormous, wind-buffeted, star-navigating, divinely sanctioned feathers. Part 55. The Last Eagle. Let me close with an image. It is the morning after the destruction of the ring. The skies over Mordor are clearing, the ash and the darkness dispersing, the sun breaking through for the first time in days, the air beginning to clear and to feel, for the first time since the dawnless day, like air rather than fume. And an eagle is flying, high, impossibly high. Above the ruin of Barad Dharka and the shattered landscape of Gorgoroth, an eagle is turning in the morning light, great wings spread, catching the sun, casting a shadow on the wasted earth below that looks, from above, like a cross, like a benediction. Like the signature of the divine written in feathers and shadow on the broken surface of the world. The eagle is looking down, seeing the ruin, seeing the smoke, seeing the lava flows and the collapsed towers and the scattered armies and the broken, burned, scarred landscape that was Mordor. And seeing, somewhere in the ruin, two small figures, two hobbits, lying on a rock, barely visible against the ash and the stone, barely alive. The most important beings in the world reduced to two specks of colour in a field of grey. The eagle descends. The great wings fold. The wind rushes. The shadow grows larger on the ground, growing, swelling, consuming the grey landscape, covering the hobbits in shade that is not darkness but shelter. The shadow of wings that are not threatening but protective, not predatory but tender. Not the shadow of a hunter, but the shadow of a guardian who has been watching from the beginning and who has come, at last, to carry the faithful home. The hobbits are lifted. The earth falls away. The ruin of Mordor shrinks below them, the lava, the smoke, the darkness, all of it falling away as the eagle climbs, as the sky opens, as the morning light grows stronger and the world, the whole, beautiful, saved, still here world, spreads out below them in a panorama that stretches from the mountains to the sea. Sam opens his eyes. He sees the sky. He sees the eagle's feathers. He sees the world below him, vast and green and beautiful. The darkness gone, the shadow lifted. The morning arrived. And Sam smiles, not because the world is perfect, not because the suffering is over, not because the loss has been undone. Sam smiles because the world is still here, because the gardens will grow again, because the stars will shine tonight, because grace has wings, and the wings have carried him, and the carrying has brought him home. The eagle turns toward the west, toward the sunshine, toward the camp where Aragorn waits, and Gandalf watches, and the living world goes on. And the wings beat, and the sky holds. And the world, which came so close to ending, does not end. It continues. It grows. It changes. It remembers. It remembers the eagles. Thank you for spending this evening with me. The eagles are not big birds. They never were. They are the proof that the sky is not empty, that the heights are not silent, and that the world, our world, the world that Tolkien imagined as the descendant of Middle-earth, is still, even now, even in our quieter and more sceptical age, beneath the wings of something that cares. We have forgotten their names. We have forgotten their nesting places. We have forgotten the sound of their cry over the battlefield. But we have not forgotten the wings. We have never forgotten the wings. Until next time.